Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel. I Became a God in American Comics. Chapter 1. Dang, dang, dang. In the damp and dark cave, a burst of blacksmithing sounds continued to sound. But it was not Tony who was hammering, but a bald man who pressed Tony's head and kept hitting it on the blacksmithing table. Boom. Stark, you dare to play tricks on me. The ferocious bald man pressed Tony's face hard on the blacksmithing table. Is this a Jericho missile? How come I didn't know that missiles can be human-shaped? The bald man lifted Tony's hair and asked him angrily, facing the hanging Mark I parts. Ah, I said this is an improved version, do you believe it? Although Tony was ragged, bleeding at the corners of his mouth, and his face was full of lumps, he was not very panicked. It's your mother. The bald man was enraged by him and kicked Tony to the ground. Tony Stark, a famous billionaire, a famous scientist, and a playboy. At this moment, he was kicked like a dog. Tony could only hold his head with both hands to protect his proud brain and his handsome face. He was kicked in the stomach when he opened the door. Ethan, who recovered after a long time, saw that the bald leader had no intention of stopping. He gritted his teeth and lowered his center of gravity. After a few months of getting along, he and Tony had already become friends of life and death. He had no worries. His wife Mia and daughter had already died. He was a rotten life, so he naturally couldn't watch Tony being beaten to death again. His life was much more important than his own. The things that could be changed were also far beyond himself. Ah, Ethan roared, swooped down, hugged the bald man's back, and planned to give him a hard hug and throw. Unfortunately, the idea is beautiful, but the reality is cruel. Ethan's bamboo-like body is obviously no match for the bald man with a strong back and strong waist. Unless he has a bottle of hand sanitizer in his hand. But obviously, he doesn't. Seeing this, the gun-wielding men around the bald leader didn't even mean to help, but just looked at Ethan's self-defeating behavior with a mocking face. Sure enough, the bald man just turned around and elbowed Ethan to the ground. Man, the angry bald man successfully attracted Ethan's attention, and the target of the beating changed from Tony to Ethan. This also gave Tony a breathing space. An ancient once said that when someone takes a beating for you, you won't be beaten. Ahem, this dog shit that looks like only egg yolk is really heavy-handed. You forced me to do this. I'm going to use my ultimate move. Tony looked at the first-generation Mark armor that was discovered before it was completed, and knew that his dream of regaining his freedom with this thing had been ruined. But it doesn't matter, the smart Stark still has a backup plan. Thinking of this backup plan, Tony's face was a little tangled. As proud as he was, he didn't want to use this plan unless he had no choice. But seeing that Ethan's thin body had been beaten into a pig's head, he was glad that he had just protected his handsome face and made a certain determination. He didn't want Ethan to be beaten to death. He didn't want to become a pig's head either. His expression was serious, and his breath sank into his dantian. He used his last ultimate move. Brother, help me. With Tony's heartbreaking cry for help. Earth, outer space. In the endless dark universe, two scarlet lights flashed by. A tall figure bathed in the sun's rays opened his eyes. Tony, hearing the call from his ear, the man in black combat uniform looked down at the blue planet under his feet. Arno Stark, the eldest son of the Stark family. Tony Stark's elder brother. He is 1.95 meters tall and weighs 120 kilograms. Black hair, black eyes, three-dimensional and majestic features. The restraints are gone. Arno looked at his hands and said to himself. He is not from this world. In layman's terms, he is a time traveler. He is not sure why he traveled through the original world. In fact, he has a vague memory of how he traveled through time. A big truck to boost performance. Or is it bad luck, a thunderbolt out of nowhere? Or is it a sudden death? But think about it. Forget it, it doesn't matter. Anyway, there are all kinds of weird ways to travel through time these days. He only remembered that at the beginning of his journey, he was in a dark green chaos. Not long after he fell into a deep sleep in the endless chaos. When he opened his eyes again, he was already born, and in the state of a baby. But his body was extremely weak, and the following days were basically he relied on drugs to maintain his vital signs. Therefore, within a month, he fell into a long sleep again. When he woke up again, it was 24 years later, in 1991. At that time, his parents in this world had died, leaving only his only brother, Tony Stark. Tony was depressed because of his parents' death and drank all day. Arnold had no feelings for his parents, whom he had only met a few times. Therefore, he did not feel sad. He just calmly called Jarvis, the old butler of the Stark family at that time, to ask about the current situation. Although he was surprised why Arnold had such a mind after waking up after sleeping for more than 20 years. But Jarvis, the butler, did not ask too much. He was loyal to the Stark family. As long as it was Howard's flesh and blood, he would trust it unconditionally. He dutifully recounted the situation of the Stark family. According to the description of Jarvis, Arnold sorted out the current situation of the Stark family. Stark Industries, the arms giant and the head of weapons manufacturers, is now in chaos. The only sober heir before, Tony Stark, is in grief and has no intention of caring about the huge Stark Industries. Arnold ignored the distraught Tony and quickly took over Stark Industries, which was caught in a power struggle due to the death of Howard Stark. He did not disappoint Jarvis and successfully inherited the wisdom of his master. It took only 1 year to stabilize the internal struggle of Stark Industries. In 2 years, Stark Industries was completely under control. After that, the two brothers each held 40% of the shares, and a total of 80% of the shares. Stark Industries had no room for others to intervene. As for why he was able to collect so many shares so quickly. In addition to his father Howard Stark's absolute control of more than 50% of the Stark Group. It was also because he discovered his own uniqueness after waking up. Sunlight. You can become stronger by basking in the sun. He discovered it when he took the first step out of the room and the sun shone on him. In 1 day, his physique surpassed the limit of human beings. In 1 year, he was no longer afraid of most conventional weapons in the world. 2 years later, he suspected that nuclear weapons were no longer effective against him. Not because the damage was not enough, but that thing could not hit him at all. Because he mastered an absolute skill in the 2nd year. Flying. At more than 10 times the speed of sound, no weapon could hit him unless he didn't want to. And it was at this time that he knew what his awakened ability was. Superman, or Kryptonian, the existence known as the god of the world. In the same year, he launched his massacre. If you are not strong enough, you will play tricks. If you are strong enough, you will directly overturn the table. All shareholders who were involved in the interest dispute after Howard Stark's death were crushed to death by him. And it was crushed to death openly. There was no assassination, no hiding. In front of all shareholders and military representatives, at the shareholders' meeting, Arno crushed the traitors one by one. He crushed the military representatives under the questioning of the military and destroyed several U.S. military bases. Next, the shares of those shareholders were naturally taken over by Arno Stark. The other surviving shareholders naturally did not dare to disobey. The U.S. side even expressed to Stark Industries that it has always been the most staunch ally of the Stark family and supports all decisions made by Arno Stark, the first heir to Howard Stark. The main point is to follow the heart. So far, with no one disobeying and everyone's expectation, Stark Industries has restored its former harmony in Arno's hands. In the 3rd year, after Tony recovered, Arno gave Tony half of the shares, and then completely handed over Stark Industries to him. There are 2 reasons for doing this. The first is because he found that managing such a large company delayed his time to become stronger. The second is because he found that there was an invisible force affecting him. As long as he has any big ideas, the invisible force will suppress him. For example, he wants to kill the president and become president himself. Another example is to conquer a country directly by force. In this bound situation, he is very annoyed. Therefore, he no longer cares about these trivial matters. It is better to bask in the sun more. When his strength reaches a certain level, he does not believe that the invisible force can still bind him. Therefore, after throwing the pot to Tony, he often disappears for several months. Every day, he faces the sun's rays outside the earth and becomes stronger rapidly. His figure gradually faded out of the public's sight. It has been several months since he last returned to Earth, and he has not shown his face in public for several years. Every time he returns to Earth, he only goes home to stay for a few days and see Tony. Until now, with Tony's cry for help, he found that the invisible restraint on his body disappeared. Although he didn't know why the restraint disappeared, it showed one thing. This shows that he can do whatever he wants. He, Superman, can do whatever he wants. The memory seems long, but it is only a moment for Arnold. He looked down at the earth, and his scarlet eyes burst out with strong murderous intent. I just disappeared for a few years, but I am not dead. Someone dared to attack the Stark family. Very good. A cruel arc appeared at the corner of Arnold's mouth. It seems that during his absence, someone forgot his existence and methods. Bang! A black shadow passed through the vacuum, and Arnold's figure disappeared. Help! No one can save you even if you scream your throat out today. The bald man stopped beating Ethan, turned around and smiled disdainfully at Tony's request for help. Then he waved his right hand, and his men immediately handed him a red-hot iron rod. Although you still have value, I don't want to kill you so soon, but it's also good to give you an unforgettable experience. The bald man held the red-hot iron rod and showed a trace of evil smile. In a word, hand over the Jericho missile to me tomorrow, otherwise. The bald man smiled without saying anything, and Tony's mouth twitched wildly. I always felt that my anus was tight, and the stick looked so unruly. But he was no longer panicked at this moment. He directly responded with an international gesture. Go home and play with the stick by yourself. Although the bald man is a supporting role who doesn't even deserve a name. But he still has dignity. He is the boss of a terrorist force after all. Being humiliated by his own prisoner made him red-hot. The fiery red stick in his hand whipped Tony's stinky face like his red-hot heart. With this stick, he must let Tony Shit Tucker know why the flowers are so red. Boom, boom. After a loud bang, the bald man's iron stick fell on a tall figure with a sound of metal and iron. The iron stick originally aimed at Tony's head hit the big S logo on the chest of the person who came. Don't get me wrong, this is not the Krypton logo representing hope, but the S logo representing the Stark family. The bald man swallowed his saliva and looked at the figure falling from the big hole above in fear. Who are you? He asked a classic American question. He was responded by a hand as big as a palm leaf fan. Arno held the bald man's head and lifted it up, looking at the 10-ring symbol in the cave expressionlessly. Let me go. Do you know who I am? The bald man felt a splitting headache from the huge force on his head, and kept hitting Arno with his hands and feet. But this little force was like asking Ethan to fight Tyson. Overestimating one's own ability. Not only did it not cause any harm to Arno, but the bald man's hands and feet were suppressed and hurt. The bald man's younger brothers also dared not move because their boss was restrained and shocked by Arno's appearance. But they didn't have to worry about their boss's safety soon. Although the bald man's fists and feet did not cause any substantial harm to Arno, they successfully attracted his attention. Bang! The watermelon exploded. You talk too much. Arno crushed the bald man in his hand and turned. He looked at the other stunned terrorists. Where is your boss? The other terrorists looked at each other in horror, not understanding what he said at all. These people were from all over the world, but none of them could speak English. Ethan spoke weakly. Ahem, you, the one you just crushed was their boss. Arno was silent for a moment, and turned around to see Tony's expression of wanting to laugh but not daring to laugh. Arno felt it necessary to show the majesty of the eldest brother. Then you are useless. As soon as he finished speaking, before the terrorists understood what he meant, a red light swept across. The light was so fast that the terrorists felt their vision spinning before they could react. Then they saw several lower bodies standing in the cave. They realized that they were cut in half. They were cut in two but not dead for a while. The cave was filled with wailing. Ethan touched his bald head that was hot from the laser sweep, and his eyes widened in fear. Fortunately, he fell to the ground. He was only 1 centimeter away from learning the shadow clone with the terrorists. After another hot line of sight, the wailing in the cave stopped abruptly. Turning his head to see Tony with a frozen expression, Arno smiled slightly. What's going on? Tony certainly knew what Arno was talking about. A few months ago, I came to Afghanistan to show off new weapons, the Jericho missile, but I was ambushed on the way back, and the other party used weapons produced by Stark Industries. Tony glanced at the gun that the terrorist dropped on the ground. Arno took a look, and then looked outside the cave. The thick walls could not block Arno's sight at all, and he went straight through the cave wall to see the many weapons with the Stark logo outside. He also saw many terrorists who had gathered and surrounded the cave entrance, and several old tanks. However, he did not care about the surrounded cave entrance, but looked at the weapons with the Stark logo for a few more times. It seems that I haven't appeared for too long this time, so some people think I'm dead. Arnold's eyes flashed red, revealing a cruel smile. It seems that there are still too many people in the board of directors, and it is necessary to lay off again. Tony looked at his brother's smile and couldn't help shuddering. It seems that someone is going to be in trouble again. Although Arnold was still immersed in sadness during the 2 years when he cleaned up Stark Industries. But this does not mean that he knows nothing. He even knows everything: bloodbath, the board of directors, violent share recovery, and destruction of military bases. He knows all these clearly. When he first knew what his brother who had just woken up had done, he was shocked and had mixed feelings. Although he was born in an arms family, he was still lawful and good in his heart. Finally, after 2.5 months of ideological struggle, he chose to believe and support his only relative in the world. He walked out of the shadows and returned to the stage, thinking about meeting his brother and helping him to support Stark Industries. As a result, as soon as he came out of the customs, Arno threw a big lump to him. Although Stark Industries had been stabilized by Arno's bloody means. But Tony really didn't want to compete with Arno for Stark Industries at that time. He really didn't want to inherit the family business, he just wanted to be a rich second generation in peace. Wouldn't it be nice to sleep with cover girls and do research? As a result, before the scene of the brothers reunited, Tony was forced to take over the entire Stark Industries. His brother often disappeared for at least a month. He was exhausted. Fortunately, he thought he was smart enough. He hired an assistant with perfect work ability. He also handed most of the company's business to his father's friend and shareholder, Uncle Stanny. He was also one of the few people he could trust. And because Arno did not clean up Obadiah, Tony trusted Obadiah even more. "What, do you still want to finish dinner here before leaving?" Arno looked at Tony, who was lost in his memories, and interrupted him. "Well, I'd better not. I guess the only dinner they left for me is peanuts." "I'm not you. I don't like peanuts," Tony subconsciously replied venomously. Responding, seeing Arno's half-smile, he quickly covered his mouth. "Hey, it seems that this lesson didn't teach you what it means to speak out of turn." "Of course, because the only two people who can understand me are Ethan and the bald guy you crushed. Judging from their situations, it's not like me to speak out of turn." Arno was too lazy to tell him, and he was not worthy of listening. "Do you still want this thing?" Arno asked as he looked at the simple armor that had not yet been assembled. "This is just a simple version made in the cave. I will make a new generation of armor when I go back. This set. Z." The red light shone on the armor, and it melted into a pile of molten iron in less than 10 seconds. "You can use it as a souvenir." Tony stared blankly at the melted Mark I. "I haven't finished talking. You are definitely taking revenge on purpose." Faced with Tony's shouting, Arno smiled without saying a word, and turned around and walked towards the cave entrance. Tony stood there helplessly and furious for a while before he helped the damaged Ethan up and slowly followed. "Tony, we can't see your brother anymore, should we walk faster?" Ethan was supported by Tony and walked slowly. Seeing that he could no longer see Arno, he became anxious. Although he was shocked by Arno's appearance and methods at first. But at the same time, it also brought him an incomparable strong sense of security. Therefore, after he could not see Arno, he panicked. "No, our speed is just right." Tony seemed to be pointing at something, and Ethan was stunned. Boom, 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 da da da. Suddenly, the cave shook, and violent explosions and gunshots came from outside. Ah! Then there was a scream. Ethan was sweating all over. He finally understood what Tony meant by the time being just right. Outside the cave, the yellow sand and the breeze blew away the black smoke and bloody smell. The black cape fluttered in the wind. Arno's tall figure stood in the air, and the red light in his eyes gradually extinguished. Instead, the black eyes reflected a bloody scene of a sea of blood and corpses on the ground. Tony helped Ethan out at this time. Even though he had enough confidence in his brother, he was still deeply shocked by the scene in front of him. The yellow sand was full of terrorists' limbs and arms, as well as steel fragments of tanks and armored vehicles. Judging from the fact that the red temperature on the fragments had not yet dissipated, these tanks and armored vehicles were no different from paper in his brother's thermal vision. What an incredible power! Tony couldn't help but sigh, and his heart became more enthusiastic about making his own steel armor. His brother has a steel body and laser beams. Then he can't fall behind. If he doesn't have the talent, then make a steel body himself. His brother is a god on Earth, so he is the one who makes gods. Tony's eyes were burning with confidence in his next work. It was definitely a work that could change the world, a masterpiece. Tony was full of fighting spirit, but Ethan's face remained unchanged at the scene in front of him. It was not because of his strong psychological quality, but because his head was still red and purple, and his face could not be seen at all. Arno slowly fell down and glanced at Tony with dissatisfaction. In Tony's confused expression, Arno's eyes shot into the cave with a fever and burned the Mark I drawings in the cave where Tony was originally imprisoned. Careless, can such a thing be left? Tony also reacted to this and scratched his head embarrassedly. Ahem, aren't you here? I'm relieved. Arno glanced at Tony unexpectedly. This poisonous and arrogant brother actually said such a thing. Forget it, pay attention next time, go back first, and take out the shrapnel in your chest tomorrow. Arno pointed at the reactor on Tony's chest. Tony's face changed, but he still pretended to be relaxed. Okay, you found it, but this shrapnel is close to the heart. With the current technology, the success rate should not be high. I think it's cool to wear this thing. Just listen to me. Prepare for surgery tomorrow. I have 2 friends who are experts in this field. Arno said, lifting Tony with one hand and Ethan with the other. In Ethan's confused eyes and Tony's helpless eyes, the 3 slowly rose into the air. Tony couldn't help complaining. Hey, why don't we wait for rescue? Do you have to carry me back? This makes Ethan and I look like little chickens in your hands. Waiting for rescue is too slow. I still have a lot of things to do. Arno took the 2 to a certain height, his eyes burst red, and his hot vision destroyed all the surrounding Stark industrial weapons before flying away. Malibu Beach Villa. 3 figures landed from the sky in front of the sci-fi gate. Shit, it feels so good to fly freely. It would be even better if I could fly myself. Tony was excited. Although he knew his brother could fly, this was his first time to be taken flying. He was fascinated by the feeling of flying freely. He couldn't wait to build a new generation of Mark armor to realize his dream of flying. Arno supported Ethan, who was weak in the legs, and mocked, I should have thrown you down halfway just now, so that you could enjoy the feeling of flying freely. Tony raised his eyebrows. Oh, then you should throw me to the burger shop. I just want cheeseburgers. Can you go in first? I want to drink a glass of water. Ethan raised his trembling hand to interrupt the bickering between the 2. After the high-speed flight just now, his stomach was already churning. Arno stopped bickering with Tony and glanced at Ethan, whose face was blue, purple and white. He thought, if it weren't for his outrageous biological stance. At this speed, you are not uncomfortable, but already sparking. Arno held Ethan forward with one hand. The glass door opened automatically, and a magnetic mechanical voice came. Welcome home, Master, and Mr. Ethan. Finally, Mr. Stark, I'm glad you're back safely. Arno was not surprised by this. This is the intelligent butler developed by Tony. Named after their deceased butler, Jarvis. Is it an illusion? Why do I feel that there is a hint of emotion in Jarvis' voice? Tony raised his eyebrows, feeling a little confused. But he didn't think much about it or say it, just like the name he gave Jarvis. This represents its absolute loyalty to the Stark family. He believes in the intelligent system he is researching, just like he believes in himself. Tony is always so confident or conceited. Arno poured a glass of boiled water for Ethan and said to Tony, don't expose your return for the time being. Wait for me to find out who leaked your whereabouts and deal with it before returning to the stage. Tony nodded. He is not stupid. Only a few insiders know his route, plus the weapons produced by Stark Industries in the hands of terrorists. It is obvious that there is a traitor in Stark Industries. And returning to the stage now will only hide the people who framed him. If there is no Arno, Tony may go to check it himself, and exposure is inevitable. But with the elder brother here, isn't it better to lie flat? Anyway, he won all the way like this more than 10 years ago, right? Why not lie again? With a powerful elder brother, willful. Suddenly Tony remembered something, and his face was a little embarrassed. After a long time, he said, "Can you tell Pepper?" Arno smiled, with an expression that said, "I've seen that you two are having an affair for a long time. Okay, I'll call her to come over. I just need her to help with something." As he said that, he called Pepper to come to the villa. Although he was a little surprised that the largest shareholder who had not seen him for several years called him. But because Arno was Tony's brother, Pepper did not hesitate and quickly rushed to the villa. Pepper got out of the car with a tired face and looked at the tall figure full of oppression at the door. At this moment, Arno had changed out of his combat uniform and put on a dark blue suit. Pepper's heart beat faster unconsciously, and that figure made her feel extremely depressed. She finally mustered up the courage to step forward and gritted her teeth and said, "Mr. Stark, did you call me here this time because of Tony's disappearance? It's not that I didn't want to inform you about this, but you couldn't get through on the phone. Of course, if you want to fire me for this, I have no complaints, but please let me finish the task of finding Tony before firing me. I have found several reliable hired teams. Please don't give up hope for Tony, please." Pepper finished speaking in one breath, already sweating profusely. She had only met Arno a few times in total, and didn't understand how he and Tony were related. With the generally ruthless way of getting along among the rich, she was very afraid that Arno would directly give up Tony, whose life or death was unknown. Arno walked slowly to Pepper, and his tall shadow covered Pepper's weak body. He stretched out his big hand, and Pepper closed her eyes tightly, thinking that Arno was angered by her rudeness. "Well, you are very good and qualified to be Tony's wife." Arno patted Pepper's shoulder and smiled. Preparing to be beaten the moment before, Pepper was stunned by Arno's words the next moment, and hurriedly tried to explain that she and Tony were not in that kind of relationship. "Hey, I'm not, Pepper," a gentle voice interrupted her words, and she looked stiffly behind Arno. That was the person she had been thinking about day and night for the past few months. Tony. Although Tony was a bad person, sleeping with models in a week, which ordinary people would never sleep with in their lifetime, Pepper had to clean up the garbage after he used it. But unconsciously, she had some different feelings for Tony in her heart. Love comes from nowhere, and love is deep. Pepper was overwhelmed by the joy of a moment, and she didn't know where she got the courage, and she stepped forward and hugged Tony. Tony received the person and gently stroked Pepper's blonde hair, and the softest part of his heart was touched. Maybe he should really settle down. "That's enough. We have some work to do. Lend me Pepper for a while and I'll return it to you in the evening." Arno was like a blind man who interrupted the growing relationship between the two. Pepper quickly broke away from Tony's arms, her face flushed. Tony looked at his brother with a face full of resentment. This is definitely jealousy, naked jealousy. Pepper is worthy of being the best assistant, and she quickly got into work mode. With her wisdom, she quickly understood what Arno meant. Tony is back now, and it's time to settle accounts. She straightened her professional suit and said seriously, "What do you need me to do, boss?" If her face wasn't so red, Arno would have thought that nothing had happened just now. Tony was really lucky to find such a good assistant. Bad people have good luck. "Let's go, tell him in the car, take me to Stark Tower first." After saying that, Arno took the lead and walked towards the car driven by Pepper. Tony also nodded to Pepper. "I can't show up for the time being, just listen to him, he will solve everything." Understood. Pepper didn't dare to look at Tony, nodded quickly in response, and ran away. I don't know if it was because she was afraid that Arno would wait for a long time, or because she was shy. Arnold, who was sitting in the back seat, thought it should be the latter. Stark Tower. Arnold sat in the president's office, looking expressionlessly at the video of Tony being kidnapped on the computer. Pepper covered her mouth behind her, looking unbelievable. Tony was kidnapped by Obadiah. It's not kidnapping, it's murder, but he just overestimated the credibility of those desperate people. Arno sneered, a little surprised about this, but not much. Surprisingly, he didn't expect that Obadiah, who didn't get involved in the power struggle during his last purge and tried his best to help Stark Industries overcome difficulties, would be the mastermind this time. Tony has always regarded him as his own uncle and trusts him immensely. Human hearts are unfathomable, but he didn't care too much. He had no feelings for this so-called uncle. In his heart, he had already sentenced the person who kidnapped Tony to death. So no matter who it was, he didn't care. Their fate was doomed the moment they attacked Tony. Pepper, convene the board of directors. All directors must be present within an hour. Otherwise, you will bear the consequences. Notify in my name. Okay, boss. Pepper is very efficient. The directors arrived even faster. They all arrived in half an hour, sweating profusely. In the huge conference room, the directors sat down carefully one by one, not daring to make too much noise, as if they were afraid of disturbing the figure in the main seat above who was looking at the documents in his hand. As the last bald and bearded man, Obadiah, walked into the conference room, all the board members were present. Dong, dong, dong. Arno looked at the documents in his hand, tapping his fingers on the table, and the crisp sound was like the sickle of the god of death knocking on the gate of hell. The directors experienced the oppression that Pepper had endured before. No, to be precise, it was not only oppression, but also fear. After all those who were still alive were members who had experienced the bloody massacre more than a decade ago. They knew even more about the horror of the real boss behind Stark Industries. Arno stopped tapping, put down the document in his hand, looked up at everyone and smiled dangerously. Do you know why I called you here this time? The air seemed to drop by more than 10 degrees in an instant, and all the directors trembled unconsciously. The last time Arno laughed like this, more than half of the board members disappeared. Physically disappeared. Oh, no one is talking, right? Then I will nominate myself. Alfred, this name is quite interesting. Are you Batman's butler? Arno stood up, walked slowly, walked behind a gray-haired bald director, put his hands on his shoulders and said in a faint tone. Alfred hurriedly wanted to stand up to show his loyalty, but was held down by Arno and could not move. No, 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 boss, I am absolutely loyal to Stark Industries, I am absolutely loyal to you, Arno covered Alfred's mouth and said slowly, Shish, I am not asking you if you are loyal now, I know these things myself, I am asking if you are Batman's butler. Alfred was covered with his mouth and could not speak, so he could only shake his head silently. Oh, it seems that you are not Batman's butler, and you don't have a master who can kill my master with kryptonite, right? Facing the devil's whisper echoing in his ears, Alfred kept breaking down and shaking his head. The other directors trembled even more, everyone lowered their heads, and no one dared to make a sound. Only Obadiah frowned, and his uneasiness gradually increased. Because Alfred was his man, and he was also the one who connected the weapons sold to terrorists. Bang! The sudden sound scared everyone. Then they felt wet on their faces, and when they looked up, Alfred was left with only a headless corpse. His head bloomed on the conference table like a red spider lily. And everyone's face was stained with the petals of the red spider lily. People marked by it, like the place where it grows, are in danger of death at any time. Look at me, tell me, how dare you attack the Stark family again? Arno glanced at everyone expressionlessly, and the strong sense of oppression made people subconsciously want to avoid his sight. But Arno's next sentence made everyone's necks stiff. Look at me, whoever dares to bow his head, he will be the second Alfred. Start speaking now. The directors were sweating, thinking about their own words, but no one dared to whisper to others, or even turn their heads, and could only stare at Arno with his hands behind his back. In the end, Obadiah, the third largest shareholder of Stark Industries and a veteran who voluntarily handed over half of his shares in the last cleansing incident, stood up. Arno, I am half your uncle, I wonder if you have any misunderstandings. Maybe you are furious because of Tony's disappearance. However, our board of directors has held several meetings to discuss how to rescue Tony. We also fully support Miss Potts in finding a hired team to go to Afghanistan to find Tony's trace. Trust us, Tony will be fine, we will definitely rescue him. Obadiah explained calmly, but the sweat under his ears betrayed his uneasy heart. Oh, what should I say, he is really a good uncle of me and Tony, a close friend of my father, the great Obadiah Stani, right? Arno narrated the words of praise, walked back to his seat, picked up the document he had just read and raised it. Look, do you know what this is? Obadiah's heart sank. He had to have understood something. Arno, those materials may not be true. You know there are many people who want to cause internal strife in Stark Industries. Maybe they forged it. Obadiah made his last struggle, and quietly put his hand in his pocket to hold the infrasonic device. Arno just glanced at his little action casually, sneered and threw the documents in his hand on the ground casually. My dear Uncle Stani, maybe you haven't figured it out yet. I don't need these documents to prove anything. I just need a list. This is a list, not evidence. Arno smiled and looked at Obadiah, his eyes gradually red. Mike D's, Z, bang, Benny Rocky, Z, bang. Aben Jess, bang, bang, bang. As Arno called out the names, the red light made the heads of the directors explode one by one. Kate Tran, oh, there is another lady involved, she is so brave. The female director who had been scared to death finally collapsed when she heard her name. At this moment, she was crying and kneeling on the ground, kowtowed to Arno. I was wrong, I was wrong. I was really wrong. Please forgive me this time, I was bewitched by Stani, I didn't mean it, I am willing to give you everything I have. Money, shares, me, and even the entire Tran family will be yours, just forgive me this time. Bang bang bang. With a series of crisp sounds, the ground was soon stained with blood, but she didn't dare to stop kowtowing. No, ma'am, don't be like this, you know. I am actually a person who respects women very much. Arno helped Kate up, put his hand on her bleeding forehead and comforted her softly. Oh my God, thank you. Thank you for sparing my life. I swear that my family and I will be loyal to you forever. Bang. The dark red liquid flowed down, and Kate's headless body fell softly. I think you misunderstood. I respect women equally. Men and women are equal, right? Arno let the blood in his palm drip continuously, and then slowly walked towards Obadiah. Buzz buzz buzz. The invisible sound waves were activated by Obadiah the moment Arno approached Arno's ears. Arno was unmoved by this and took the infrasound device from Obadiah. It's a very useful gadget, made by Tony, it's really good. Obadiah looked incredulous. How is it possible? The infrasound device should cause more damage to you than ordinary people. How can you be unscathed? Indeed, with my hearing, this thing is really noisy, but it can cause damage to me. Puff. Arno grabbed Obadiah's neck unexpectedly and lifted his tall body in the air. This kind of thing, even if it is strengthened 10,000 times, is just noise to me. Obadiah knew he was going to die, his face was ferocious and crazy. Stark family fool, I am the one who made the greatest contribution to Stark Industries, why did you little beasts enjoy everything in the end? Arno looked at Obadiah who was struggling indifferently, as if he was looking at an ant. No matter how much you contribute, you must remember that it is called Stark Industries, not Stani Industries. Do you deserve to be the master? Little beast, you must. Bang. Arno smashed Obadiah's hand on the conference table to interrupt his cursing. He held his bald head with both hands. I wanted to give you a quick death, but the child who cursed must be punished. Look into my eyes. As Obadiah screamed, his eye sockets were burned by the red light in Arno's eyes until they penetrated the table. Under his intentional control, Obadiah died after experiencing the pain of his eyeballs being burned through. Arno looked at the remaining directors alive with his eyes still burning. The remaining red light and blood made his face look extremely hideous. You were lucky this time. I didn't find any handle, but next time, as long as one of you dares to make any decision against the wishes of the Stark family behind my back, you will all go to hell. The scene was extremely silent. All the directors were frightened and unable to move. Their eyes were full of fear, and their throats were like lead and could not make any sound. Tell me now, did you hear clearly? With Arno's shout, the remaining people woke up. Understood. I swear to be loyal to the Stark family for life. Loyal to you. As the first person swore loudly, the others hurriedly followed suit. Very good. Then, military representative, do you have any advice on my approach this time? Arno finally looked at the director in military uniform, who was also a representative of the military. No, our military has nothing to do with this matter. We have always been the most steadfast ally of the Stark family. The military representative, who was worshipped like a god in other arms groups, stood up in panic at this moment like a primary school student being called by the teacher, and even saluted. Haha, I'm not your leader, I don't need you to salute, put your hands down. Arno joked. But no one dared to laugh, all of them shrank their necks and shrank back. Okay, today's meeting is over. I hope everyone will work hard next time and let Stark Industries go to the next level. Let's adjourn. Arno said with a smile, opened the door of the conference room and walked out. Suddenly, there was a sound of people falling to the ground. Oh my God, boss, what happened to you? Are you injured? Pepper, who was guarding not far from the door, was shocked to see Arno walking out covered in blood. Arno's current image was really scary. His body and face were covered in blood. The dark blue suit was almost dyed dark red. I have to say that the sound insulation of the meeting room in Stark Tower is really good. Pepper was responsible for receiving the directors at the door after notifying the directors of the meeting and waiting for Arno to go in. After all the directors went in, she was not qualified to go in because of her level, so she waited outside. Therefore, she didn't hear any movement inside and didn't know what happened. Pepper, just call me Arno from now on. I'm fine. This is not my blood. Go and ask the security department to come up and clean up the meeting room. I'm going to take a shower. After saying that, Arno walked towards the top elevator that belonged to Tony. Pepper looked at Arno's back and was about to say something, but finally stopped and took out her phone to dial out. Hey, Happy, bring a few people you trust up here, the conference room needs to be cleaned up. Before Pepper finished speaking, the meeting room the door of the office opened again, and the directors walked out tremblingly, holding the wall. Pepper also saw the hellish scene inside through the crack of the door. Snap! The phone slipped from her hand, and her blood was as cold as if it had frozen. Hey, Pepper, are you okay, Pepper? I'll be there soon. Happy's shouts kept coming from the phone on the ground, but Pepper couldn't hear it at all at this moment, her mind was blank. The water flowed across the perfect body that was carefully carved like ancient Greece, the blood was washed away, and the bloody smell also went away with the water. Putting on loose white shorts and short-sleeved shirts, Arno walked out of the bathroom. Pepper, who had been waiting for a long time, turned her head stiffly and spoke mechanically. Boss, the conference room has been cleaned up, and the military representatives have helped to deal with those bodies. Arno nodded and patted Pepper on the shoulder. Just call me Arnold, Pepper, sit in our place. Light has long ceased to exist. There is no need for all Stark people to become like me, but the Stark family needs someone like me, do you understand? Pepper's head was buzzing, but she still nodded. Very good, Pepper, you did a good job. I hope it won't affect your work at Stark. At least Tony is different from me, and you two are a good match. After saying this, Arnold patted Pepper's shoulder and turned to fly away from the balcony. Only Pepper was left standing there in a daze with mixed feelings. Not far from New York City, a former military base has now been built into a huge manor. This is thanks to the selfless contribution of the U.S. military. More than a decade ago, Arnold killed the military representative in the cleansing of Stark Industries. The military was very dissatisfied with Arnold's actions at the time, thinking that Arnold was challenging the dignity of the United States. Until Arnold destroyed several U.S. military bases under their noses like a whirlwind. The military said that in order to compensate Arno's mental loss, the military base and the land were given to him. And he simply built it into a huge manor, the kind that you would get lost walking from the bedroom to the bathroom in a domineering president's novel. The main reason is that this place is not too far from New York, and it is convenient to go to the city. After all, he is not like Tony who likes to build a villa in Malibu, where no one lives, and it takes an hour to drive into the city. Arno landed in a large garden, and several maids who were pruning branches not far away immediately spotted him. Master, you're back. Several young and beautiful maids dropped their pruning tools and swarmed around him. The chirping sound did not annoy Arno. He smiled and touched the heads of several maids, feeling very relaxed. He liked this place, his home, one of the few places where he could relax completely. Where's Wanda? A maid immediately answered. Miss Maximov went to school and hasn't come back yet, but she should be back soon. The other maids waited for her to finish before speaking again. Master has only come back once in a long time, and he thinks about Wanda when he comes back. Obviously we came earlier than her, so biased. You are all the same, I miss you all. Okay, go prepare a sumptuous dinner, I'm going to entertain guests tonight. Arno touched the little heads of the maids with different hair colors again. Although the hair color varies, the skin color is only yellow and white. He does not discriminate, he just doesn't like chocolate color. The maids left sensibly and went to inform the preparation of dinner. Arno made a phone call. Stephen, long time no see, come to the manor for dinner tonight, I need your help. After hanging up Stephen's phone, he made another call. Hey, Chen, tonight. The same words, the same words. Stephen Strange, a famous surgeon in New York. Chen Jun, the first person in Chinese and Western medicine in China, a strange man who perfectly combines Chinese and Western medicine. They are all well-known figures in the medical field. And there is only one purpose for calling them here. To remove the fragments in Tony's chest. He doesn't want his only brother to have some shrapnel around his heart that can threaten his life at any time. Although Arno and Tony didn't say it to each other, they cherished their only relative in their hearts. Buzz buzz buzz. A roar of sports car came, and a red Ferrari rushed into the manor in a high-profile manner. The moment it saw Arno, the sports car shook obviously, and then stopped at a high speed not far from Arno. The car door opened, and a handsome man with silver hair got out of the car and trotted over. Brother Arno, I'm sorry I didn't know you were back, sorry. Pietro looked embarrassed. Although Arno had taken him and his sister in, he had never had any restrictions on them. But for some reason, every time he saw Arno, he was like a child meeting his parents, and he unconsciously became nervous. In the car, a girl also opened the door and got out. Brown red hair, bright face, pure and lovely figure. Wanda Maximov, Pietro Maximov's twin sister. Born in 1989, the two were almost only 10 minutes apart. The two are only 19 years old now. After being taken in by Arno unexpectedly a few years ago, they were sent to study in New York. In fact, all the people in the manor are orphans taken in by Arno. Some of them became his Deadpools, and some of them worked in the manor. Some elites went to work in Stark Industries, lurking in every department and industry of Stark Industries. That's why he can quickly grasp the list of all the people who do shameful things behind the Stark family. These people are one of the forces he controls. Although he doesn't really need other forces besides himself. But he can't do everything himself, that's annoying and unrefined. After all, he is the current head of the Stark family. Wanda threw herself into Arno's arms, and he touched her brown-red hair lovingly. Have I studied hard in the past few months? Of course, first in the whole grade. Wanda and Arno smiled at each other. Pietro scratched his head awkwardly, he felt like a glowing large light bulb at the moment. In fact, he had no objection to his sister dating Arno, and even agreed with both hands and feet. However, Arno seemed to be unaware of Wanda's thoughts, and Wanda did not have the courage to confess to Arno. The two never broke through this window paper. It's just a difference of more than 20 years, what's the big deal? If I were a woman, I would have pursued Arno brother a long time ago. Pietro thought, and then interrupted his unrealistic thoughts. Forget it. Let them do it, it doesn't matter to me. I'll go to the kitchen to see what delicious food they made, you guys chat slowly. After Pietro finished speaking, he walked away quickly. He didn't want to stand here to illuminate these two sour and smelly people. Arno was very interested in Pietro. Trotello was very satisfied with his own feelings, and he was going to add 2 more zeros to his credit card limit as a reward. From a limit of 100,000 to 10 million. He didn't dislike Wanda. On the contrary, he liked this sunny and cheerful girl. But when he took her and Pietro in, she was only 15 years old. Although in this free country, many people at this age have tried countless fancy games. But 15-year-old Wanda was too immature and too young for him, and he spent most of his time in outer space basking in the sun because of the sense of restraint on his body. So he didn't have any thoughts and treated the relationship between men and women formally. But now it's different. The restraint on him has disappeared, and she has become an adult. Beautiful lady, can I invite you to visit the garden together? Of course. Arno stretched out his hand, and Wanda smiled even more brightly and held his hand. The two bathed in the sun and strolled in the fragrant sea of flowers. It was not until the evening when the guests were about to arrive that Arno and Wanda returned to the manor. Come to dinner together, Wanda. Knowing that Arno was going to entertain guests tonight, Wanda, who had originally planned to go back to her room, was stunned. Having dinner with guests is a treatment that only family members, or hostesses, can enjoy. Wanda's face flushed and her head felt dizzy. Is this too fast? Should I agree or accept it? Wanda was awakened by Arno's gentle call, and she was a little flustered. Then I'll go change into a dress first. After saying that, Wanda fled in a hurry, and Arno looked at her back with a slight smile on his face. Buzz buzz buzz. Another burst of ostentatious roar interrupted Arno's beautiful view. A black Lamborghini drove into the manor and drifted steadily to a stop at Arno's feet. The car door opened, and a man who looked like an elegant gentleman from ancient England came out. Arno, I haven't seen you for a few years. You've become stronger. God, when I first saw you, you were a skinny guy like Captain America before he transformed. Now you're in better shape than Captain America. How did you train? Steven started talking nonstop as soon as he got out of the car, breaking his gentlemanly appearance. Shut up, Steven. Compared to how I trained my body, you'd better drive more low-key. Sooner or later, something will happen. Arno said as he looked at the sports car that was only a fist away from his feet. Come on, I'm an old driver, no one knows the romance of extreme speed better than me, nothing will happen. Steven didn't care about Arno's warning. Tell me, what does our great genius need my help this time? Arno kicked him speechlessly. I'm not asking, I'm ordering you to help, understand? Okay, whatever you say is what it is, big boss. I won't talk to you anymore. Here, take a look at this information, how sure are you? Arno was too lazy to talk to him, and took out Tony's CT map and handed it to him. Steven took it casually and looked at it, but immediately frowned. Oh my God, the shrapnel is almost inserted into the heart, is he still alive? We used a device to absorb the shrapnel, but you know, this is not a long-term solution. Steven pinched his brows with a headache. To be honest, if you hadn't asked me to help, I wouldn't even look at this tricky operation. In my opinion, this is a sure death, and failure will affect my 100% success rate in the industry. Arno interrupted mercilessly. Stop talking nonsense, can you save him? Although he is unlikely to be saved, I can give you a whole life. Looking at Arno, who was expressionless and not amused by his humor, Steven spread his hands helplessly. Well, to be honest, even if I were the main surgeon, the survival rate would be less than 50%. Arno frowned. 50%, what's the difference between this and committing suicide? That's because Mr. Strange's vision is not long-term and broad enough, and he is limited to Western medicine without considering other methods. A strong voice came, and a middle-aged man wearing glasses and with a gentle temperament came over. Chen, welcome to my manor, this is your first time here. Arno opened his arms to welcome Chen Jun. In his opinion, this surgeon even surpassed Steven. The first person to combine Chinese and Western medicine, Chen Jun. The creator of combining acupuncture and surgery. Chen, you will chew your tongue if you talk too much. You'd better take a look before you say that my vision is narrow. Steven handed the CT in his hand to Chen Jun with a little dissatisfaction. Chen Jun took it and looked at it carefully. Steven challenged, what do you think, old man? Chen Jun just glanced at him calmly, young man, don't be too arrogant. If you're not arrogant, how can you be called a young man? Steven said arrogantly, just tell me, how confident are you, 55% or 60%? This is Steven's deliberate high opinion of respect for his senior. In fact, he never thought that anyone could be better than him in the field of surgery. This is the confidence he gained from countless surgeries that left others helpless. 90%. Tisk, only 90%. How much? Steven's eyes were about to pop out. In the old days, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. How dare you say a 90% success rate? Chen Jun smiled calmly and stood with his hands behind his back. Haha, young man, you don't understand the magic of Chinese medicine yet. Tomorrow I'll let you see it and broaden your horizons. Steven wanted to say something else, but was interrupted by Arno. Okay, I believe in Chen's medical skills. Tomorrow, Steve will also need you to help Chen as his assistant. Whether Chen is lying or not will be revealed by then. Now you two are thirsty after talking for so long. Let's have a drink and dinner together. After saying this, Arno invited the two to walk to the restaurant. Although Steven still wanted to discuss the outrageous success rate of 90% with Chen Jun, he had to follow Arno and Chen Jun when he saw that Arno and Chen Jun had already walked to the restaurant. Passing through the long corridor, beautiful maids in various maid costumes on both sides of the road greeted Arno and the other two respectfully. Evil capitalism, Steven, who was walking at the end, said in a disdainful tone, but the envy in his eyes was about to overflow from his eyes. Chen Jun glanced at Steven lightly. These are all orphans taken in by Arno. Kindness will always bring good rewards. This is what he deserves. Arno, who was walking in front, ignored Steve's sour remarks. As soon as he stepped into the restaurant, he was dazzled by the beautiful scenery in front of him. The girl in a red dress walked down from the attic, and every step seemed to be walking in his heart. Arno smiled and stretched out his hand to the girl. Wanda naturally reached out and held Arno's big hand. How do I look today? Although her face was flushed, Wanda still plucked up the courage. She didn't want to wait any longer, and she didn't want to miss it. Arno looked at the white little hand, understood her intention. He didn't answer, but hugged Wanda's slender waist and kissed her directly. This kiss was hot and beautiful. At least that's what Arno thought before Steven came in. Oh, look what this is, I think I'm here at the wrong time. An exaggerated monkey cry sounded, and Steven covered his eyes but looked at the two people kissing openly with his fingers exposed. Chen Jun, who entered the room only one step later than Arno, was very unhappy with Steven's behavior of disturbing the warming relationship of the young people. Hasn't anyone told you that you should stay quietly aside and appreciate the beauty of the moment instead of breaking it? Ahem, I didn't mean to disturb this beautiful scene. Steven was also a little embarrassed. It was really the first time he saw Arno kissing a woman in person after knowing him for so many years, and he couldn't help but be surprised. Steven, believe me, sooner or later you will be taught a lesson for your foul mouth. Arno was disturbed by Steven, and let go of Wanda, who was blushing, and led her to the main seat. Everyone, take a seat, don't be polite, enjoy your meal. Steven and Chen Jun took their seats one after another. Looking at the various ingredients on the table, Steven glanced at the knife and fork in his hand and felt that he was being targeted. Hey, Arno, can you tell me what these weird dishes are? Steven was full of black lines, and there were a variety of dishes on the huge long table. But he didn't recognize 90% of them, or he had never eaten them. This is Chinese food, idiot. Of course I prepared white rice for you, you can enjoy it alone. Arno looked at Steven with contempt and snapped his fingers. Two maids brought 2 silver plates and placed them in front of Steven. Steven opened the silver lid of the table, revealing top-quality steak and foie gras. Oh, this looks much more normal. Okay, Chen, don't worry about this guy, start eating. Arno took the lead and picked up a piece of duck stuffed with glutinous rice and put it in Wanda's bowl. Chen Jun also picked up his chopsticks and sighed at the rich food on the table. I didn't expect that I could eat authentic Chinese food that is comparable to the Manchu Han banquet in the far west. You really put in a lot of effort, Mr. Stark. Although this is a little richer than usual, I actually eat Chinese food in my manner every day. I personally prefer Chinese food with rich flavors. Arno raised the goblet in his hand, raised it to Chen Jun and Steven, and drank the motai in it. Chen Jun picked up the wine glass, moved his nose, and instantly smelled the strong aroma of white wine. He glanced at Steven and smiled slightly, and drank it all without changing his expression. Although Steven smelled the strong aroma of the wine and felt that it was a kind of wine he had never drunk before, he thought that it was normal that he had never drunk the rare wine collected by Arno, a stinking rich man, and did not think much about it. On the contrary, with the mentality of beating the rich, he thought that he must drink more today, and he also drank it in one gulp. Puff, cough, cough, cough. The moment he took a sip, Steven felt that his mouth, throat, and even his whole body felt like burning. Alachette, what is this? Alcohol. Chen Jun's upright face showed a strange smirk. Chinese strong liquor, strong and warm, isn't it? Stephen felt the burning sensation in his throat, and his mouth twitched wildly. Strong liquor. You Chinese drink this kind of liquor. It doesn't match the gentle and peace-loving character of you Chinese people at all. Gentle, haha, maybe. Chen Jun did not comment on this. The barbarians had no idea about the horrific history of the ancient Chinese dynasty. Okay, skip this sensitive topic and continue eating. Arno interrupted at the right time. But Stephen looked at the table full of delicious food and the three people who were eating happily. Then he looked at the steak and foie gras on the plate with a single color and simple taste, and suddenly felt that he had no appetite. Hey, I'm also a guest at this dinner, I want to eat the same as you. As he said, he pushed away the plate in front of him and used a fork to pick up a happiness meatball nearby. Not bad, although the taste is different from ours, but it's acceptable. Stephen said as he pushed away the steak and foie gras in front of him. Tried the other dishes one by one. Although he couldn't get used to some of them, they were generally quite good. After all, you can't expect him, a wild boar who is used to eating white people's food, to get used to all the fine bran. Arno and Chen Jun smiled at each other. It seems that Stephen has opened a new door. After 3 rounds of wine, the dishes have tasted 5 flavors. Stephen was uncomfortable with his bloated stomach and collapsed on the chair. There were too many dishes, even if he only ate a bite of each one, he would still be bloated. Arno wiped the corners of his mouth and started to talk about business. You two will stay in the manor tonight to rest for 1 night, and work hard to prepare the plan for tomorrow's surgery. Stephen was so bloated that he couldn't speak. He felt that the food in his stomach would pour out as soon as he opened his mouth. Chen Jun drank the tea brought by the maid, took out the CT in his bag and said, "No problem, Mr. Strange, and I will work out the plan for tomorrow's surgery tonight. With the help of this surgical genius, I believe the operation will be completed smoothly." Stephen raised his eyebrows at Chen Jun, looking a little proud. I didn't expect that. Although this old guy was a little arrogant, he still had a good vision and knew the strength of this genius. Chen Jun was indifferent to Stephen's proud expression. One thing for one thing. Although he looked down on Stephen's arrogant character, he still recognized his professionalism. In the United States, there are probably less than a handful of surgeons who are better than Stephen. In terms of simple surgical operations, Chen Jun believes that he is not as good as Stephen. But he has his unique skills. The ancient medical skills of China for 5,000 years cannot be compared with this country that has only been founded for more than 200 years. Well, I'll leave my brother to you two. Arno didn't have too many worries about this operation. Not only because he believed in the medical skills of Chen Jun and Stephen, but in fact, he also knew how to perform surgery and would be present throughout the process to avoid accidents. Although he had spent a day learning all the procedures of surgery and how to deal with various accidents from Stephen. But he was still not a professional, so he still invited 2 professionals to come. And he was the last layer of protection. With his X-vision and hand speed, even if he failed, he could ensure timely rescue and keep Tony alive. Arno waved his hand, and 2 of the maids who were guarding the side came over immediately. Take the 2 guests to the conference room. No one is allowed to disturb them without their orders. Yes, sir. Arno turned his head and looked at Chen Jun and the others. You two, concentrate on making preparations for the operation. If you need anything, just tell them. They will always be guarding the door of the conference room. Chen Jun and Stephen nodded to show that they understood. A maid respectfully gestured to them to invite them in and led the way. Chen Jun followed first. Steve was overfed and was supported by another maid, following behind. Wanda, who had been sitting quietly beside Arno, waited until Arno finished talking to the 2 before curiously asking, "Brother Arno, do you have a younger brother?" Arno was stunned, and then he remembered that he seemed to have not told Wanda and Pietro about his identity for so many years. Of course, this cannot be blamed on him. In fact, except for those who went to work in Stark Industries, most other people in the manor did not know his true identity. Because they were all orphans from all over the country who were taken in by him, Arno gave them a worry-free life and a good education, so they also had absolute trust in Arno, and few people would specifically ask for their full names. When Arno adopted these children, he asked them to call him Arno or Master. Over time, The people in the manor either called him Master or Brother Arno, and few people knew his full name. Arno joked, "I forgot to tell you my full name. You will have to change your name when you marry me. It will be a joke if you don't know your surname." Wanda's face turned red from pale to red when she heard it. "Ah. Brother Arno, what are you talking about? What about marrying me?" Wanda felt her face was burning and her head was dizzy. She finally mustered up the courage to confess to Brother Arno and was ready to be his girlfriend, but Arno's words, "marry him," broke her defense again. Although she was extremely shy, the joyful smile on her lips was harder to suppress than AK. She was already thinking about what the name of her future child should be. Looking at Wanda, who was so shy that she almost got under the chair, Arno laughed. "So cute. My full name is Arno Stark, and I am the current head of the Stark family. You will also be the mistress of the Stark family in the future, Wanda Stark. How about this name? Not bad." Wanda's shy smile froze, and her face instantly lost color and turned pale. She could no longer hear what Arno said next, and her mind kept echoing the surname that Arno had just said, which had been lingering in her mind like a nightmare for more than 10 years. Stark. Arno Stark. How could it be? Boom. There was an inexplicable thunder in the dark night outside the window, and a flash of red lightning flashed. Arno frowned. Why did he feel that the sky was a little scarlet? Then he realized that something was wrong, and Superman's senses instantly noticed the changes in the people around him. Wanda's face was pale and her eyes were dull. And most importantly, strands of deep red energy were constantly pouring out of her body. The red energy was radiating very quickly, spreading from Wanda's body in the form of mist. Arno was not in a hurry. He stood up and stepped back a few steps, waving his hand and saying in an orderly manner, "All of you retreat. Notify everyone to go to the safe bunker, and turn off all the surveillance in the manor." Although the maids serving beside were a little panicked by Wanda's sudden change, they immediately calmed down after hearing Arno's voice. With Master Arno around, they were not afraid of anything. In their hearts, the Master was omnipotent. The maids saluted respectfully, withdrew in an orderly manner, and went to notify people to evacuate and turn off the surveillance. Arno folded his hands and observed Wanda's situation, waiting for everyone to retreat to the bunker. Unconscious, Arno looked at Wanda's lifeless eyes through the scarlet mist and whispered. When the time was almost up, he looked around, his eyes scanning like a radar. Seeing that everyone, including Steven, had retreated to the bunker, he had no scruples. "That's fine." Arno took off the suit he had put on for the dinner slowly, leaving only a white shirt. "I heard that Kryptonians have low magic resistance. Haha, I don't believe it." There was some madness in Arno's eyes, and his right hand stretched directly towards the red mist. Chi chi chi. The moment he entered the red mist, the white sleeves of his arms were instantly corroded, revealing the iron arms that were like steel. Feeling the slight pain from his arms, Arno's mouth corners raised. "I haven't felt this kind of pain for a long time, I really miss it." Since awakening the Kryptonian physique, in 2 years he has transformed from a useless person who can only stand up to a human nuclear bomb. More than 10 years have passed, and he has been absorbing solar rays outside the Earth. He himself doesn't know how powerful he is and how strong his body is. It has been more than 10 years since he felt what pain feels like. Being strong has a price. You become stronger and lose pain. Seeing that the scarlet mist on his arm could not corrode him, a repulsive force came, trying to squeeze his arm out. HMPH. Arno snorted coldly, and stretched his other hand in, holding the dense red mist with both hands. He slowly exerted force on his arm and forcibly tore the red mist apart, revealing Wanda, whose eyes were shining red and in a trance. S's. Power of chaos. Do you listen to others? Arno ignored the restaurant that was destroyed by the red energy and directly carried the unconscious Wanda in his arms. The moment of contact, he felt dazed and felt like someone was trying to drill his head with an electric drill. Unfortunately, he met the iron-headed kid, the titanium-headed Arno. No matter how hard the electric drill tried, it couldn't get into his brain. However, Arno looked at Wanda's eyes, which were still glowing red, and thought about it. It seems that we have to figure out where Wanda's ability comes from and why she lost control. Arno relaxed his mind and his vision was covered by red mist. What Arno didn't know was that at the same time, Pietro, who was anxious in the bunker, suddenly fainted. Steven and Chen Jun hurried up to check. When Arno regained his sight again, he was already in an ancient town. There were teams of rebels running forward around him. Looking down at his still naked upper body, Arno's mind moved, and a gray suit appeared on his body. It's really an illusion. The result was as Arno expected. After all, he didn't have the ability to conjure objects out of thin air in reality. Hey, who are you? Put your hands up. Suddenly, a loud shout came from behind. Turning around, I saw a team of rebels behind me, and even a gun was about to hit my forehead. Arno couldn't help but admire. This illusion NPC has a high degree of self-awareness. Wanda's power doesn't seem to be as weak as she thought, as she has such a degree of reality just after awakening. When a crisp sound came from Arno's forehead, Arno and the rebels in front of him stared at each other. I didn't say a word, and they hit me too right. The rebels were also confused. If they didn't answer you, who else should they hit? But why was this guy fine when the gun was fired, but his hand was hurt? Before he could figure it out, his vision was occupied by red light. Arno's eyes glowed red, and in front of him was the headless body of the rebel slowly falling. Seeing this, other rebels raised their guns and shot. Bang bang bang. Dang dang dang. The bullets hit the body. It can't be said that there was no effect, but it only had some effect on the clothes. Arno frowned and looked at the bullet holes on the suit. Did the biological stand fail? The red light in his eyes began to extinguish. It seems that the thermal vision is also losing its effect. Wanda's power wants to restrict my ability. This is really overestimating one's own ability. Buzz. A hot line of sight several times thicker than usual, almost as thick as Arno's head, burst out from his eyes. The rebels in front of him, including the building in front of him, were all flattened. The terrifying destructive power of a natural disaster. The restraining power disappeared instantly, no longer trying to restrain his power. He ignored the ruins around him that were wailing all over the ground because of the collapse of his hot line of sight. Arno seemed to have sensed something and flew in one direction. Not long after, he came to a small attic. Looking inside, there were 2 men and 2 women, 2 adults and 2 children in the old living room. The family of 4 looked terrified in the chaotic gunfire around them, but they still finished dinner in a warm atmosphere after praying. After dinner, the man who looked like a father seemed to be afraid that his daughter and son were too scared. He comforted his children a few words, took out a disc, and played it in the excited eyes of the 2 children. The 2 children sat in front of the TV excitedly, discussing the plot on the screen. Their father also sat on the sofa behind them, snuggling with his wife and watching the 2 children smile. It was just a black and white and boring picture, but the family of 4 watched it with relish. Perhaps this disc has become their only comfort in the troubled times. Arno looked at this scene, sighed, and had guessed something. Whoosh! A sound of breaking through the air came. A missile flew past him and fell straight into this warm little home. In his eyesight, the missile's top speed was like standing still. The words, Stark Industries, on the missile came into view. So that's it, no wonder Wanda lost control after hearing Stark. Arno could easily stop the missile and avoid this tragedy. But he didn't do it. This is just an illusion. Even if he stopped it, the painful memory would still exist in Wanda's heart. A hasty change would only make Wanda sink deeper and deeper. Chapter 11. What he wanted was to untie Wanda's knot, not just to make her forget her painful memories temporarily. As the fierce flames engulfed the small living room, Arno's face was illuminated by the orange-red flames. The flames swept over Arno, and he was unscathed. Even his clothes only had a few bullet holes shot by the rebels. But the family of 4 in the small home did not have the same iron body and biological stance as him. The missile landed right on the sofa where the parents of the 2 children were sitting. The warm little home was gone, replaced by a ruin and 2 charred bodies. The 2 children didn't know whether it was good luck or other reasons, but they were just hit by the shock wave and suffered minor injuries. They didn't have time to be too sad, and they heard the piercing air defense alarms and violent explosions outside. Without the protection of her parents, little Wanda was confused and terrified. Until Pietro pulled up Wanda, who was sitting on the ground, and the 2 hid together in the ruins. The only place they could hide was under the bed. They held each other's hands tightly, their eyes full of fear. Misfortunes never come alone. Bad things will never let you go just because you are pitiful. A missile with Stark Industries printed on it fell not far from the brother and sister again. I don't know whether it is lucky or unlucky. The missile did not explode immediately, but the red light shining on it was like the scythe of the god of death, constantly approaching. Waiting for death is always more terrible than death itself. They had no way to escape. The only passage ahead was blocked by missiles and rubble. They could only helplessly pray for God's blessing under the bed. Arno was like a bystander, witnessing the whole process. This is Wanda's hard knot. He sighed in his heart. In a cruel war, the most hurt are always civilians. He felt guilty about Wanda's experience, but only because of his love for Wanda. Weapons are not right or wrong, only the people who use weapons are wrong. In the timeline where Wanda was, he was no longer in charge of Stark Industries. He spent most of his time outside the Earth basking in the sun. At that time, Stark Industries was managed by Tony. And Tony was also a person who didn't like to take charge of things, so the arms export business was basically managed by Obadiah. This batch of weapons was probably sold to the rebels by Obadiah. Drop, drop, drop. In the sound of life-threatening red light, little Wanda gave up praying to the incompetent god. A red light flashed in her eyes, and her hand slowly reached out to the missile. A trace of invisible energy invaded the missile, and after a moment, the shining red light on the missile disappeared. Arno looked through the inside of the missile and saw that the original structure of the missile had been forcibly changed, so it lost its effect. Otherwise, with the workmanship of Stark Industries, there would be no duds. Has the ability been awakened at this time? It seems that the knot ends here. It's time for him to appear. Arno walked into the hut. He pushed aside the huge rubble in front of him like foam and walked in. He came to the two people who were still full of fear and dared not come out. The light in front of the two people who were afraid was suddenly covered, and they couldn't help but look up. A tall figure turned his back to the fire outside the house, so they couldn't see the face of the person coming. In the eyes of the brother and sister, he stretched out a broad palm to them. Appeared in front of them like a god. Do you want to come with me? The brother and sister stared blankly at the tall figure covered with holy light, and finally slowly stretched out their hands. A red light flashed, and in an instant, the brother and sister were already 15 years old. The three people were no longer surrounded by ruins, but a dilapidated rooftop. The boy and girl sat in the dilapidated shed on the rooftop, staring blankly at the tall man in the sun. This dilapidated shed was their temporary home. It was biting in winter and hot in summer, and even homeless people disdained to live there. Living here is simply torture. It is better to lie on a park chair. But it is not okay for the boy. He doesn't care, but his sister must not spend the night in a dangerous park. At the age of 15, other children of his age are still growing up carefree in college. And he has taken on the responsibility of a man, and needs to consider the food, clothing and safety of his sister. But he and his sister are illegal residents, and they have no stable living conditions, so no one will formally hire him. In this shitty country, you can't even find a decent job without your own house. It's ridiculous. So the boy can only rely on odd jobs and occasional free food and supplies distributed by caring people to survive. The boy is not very old, but he has dyed his hair silver, looking like a gangster. Yan shi jj funyan ching mian rong sha kui ruo de zg ideographic period. Lian shang shi da he ling gong ke bu ge ta gong qian, yu dui fang fa sheng zheng chao shi bei ren zo de sheng ko, zuo shona jie yi dai ling dao de shin mian bao ideographic period. Nu hai zai shi yi tu zong hong tu fa, po ju de yi fue wei pu pu de lian yi ju nan yan nu hai de mei li ideographic period. Ta ji dao zai mei yu ren a bei jing de qing quang sha, ziji de mei mao ji wei ge tian jia bu bai yao de ma fan, suo yi ping shi do guai chao de dai zai wu li ideographic period. Ni men, yao a wo lai ma. Lu lang la shi lai nian de shang mei. Kan jie yang guang sha di si dui ta men shen chu shou de nan ren dai zu la ideographic period. Kan jie jin zai ji kai de quan da shou zhang, ta men hao bu yu de fang la shang ku ideographic period. Jie shi a nuo yu wang da a pai te luo di yi cgn mian de chong jing ideographic period. Hong guang fu gai yi ki, wang da zhang kai yan, ziji yi jing zai nuo quan hu de wai li la ideographic period. Aer nuo da gay. Wang da yan xian fu za de kan jie mian qian jun lang de mian wrong ideographic period. Arno stroked her hair and said softly, Wanda, weapons are neither right nor wrong, only people are wrong. If there is no Stark missile that day, there will be missiles from Hammer Industries and others. As long as there are still people who want to start a war, the war will still come. Wanda's face was still a little tangled, but if Stark Industries hadn't sold missiles to the rebels, the missiles might not have landed on our house. Arno shook his head. You were right, there is indeed such a possibility. Then I have good news for you. I just killed the person who sold weapons to the rebels at noon. It can be regarded as revenge for you. Quote. Wanda stared at Arno blankly, and said stupidly, but isn't the president your brother Tony Stark? You crushed him to death. Arno flicked Wanda's forehead with a smile. What are you thinking? Tony never sells weapons to terrorists. These are all done without his knowledge by Obadiah Stani, the third largest shareholder of Stark Industries. I believe you also know that Tony's life and death in Afghanistan is unknown. I came back this time to rescue Tony and clean up the traitors in Stark Industries, including Obadiah who sold weapons to the rebels. Quote. As the target of her hatred, Tony Stark, of course, she has always paid attention to him. After the news of Tony's attack in Afghanistan was broadcast, she was so happy that she almost opened champagne to thank God for his eyes. But now after listening to Arno's words, she was confused. Doesn't this mean that she has been hating the wrong person for more than 10 years? She knew that everything Arno said was true. Arno never hid his specialness in front of the people in the manor, and she also knew that he had been absorbing the energy of the sun outside the earth for a long time. He never disdained to hide or lie. But with her previous status, it was impossible for her to have a channel to know that Tony Stark had a brother who was also the real Stark ruler. So she always put her hatred on Tony Stark, the president of Stark Industries, who was in the open, and believed that he was the culprit who killed her parents. And with the belief that she would avenge her parents one day, she and her brother struggled in this cruel world for more than 10 years. Until the brother and sister were adopted by Arno, who gave them unprecedented respect and life, this belief gradually became deeply hidden in their hearts, because they did not want to cause trouble for Arno. In the eyes of the brother and sister, Stark Industries is a huge monster with no end in sight. Although the eldest brother Arno is very capable, they do not want to cause trouble for him. Now they know that the real owner of Stark Industries has always been the eldest brother Arno who led them out of the darkness. And Tony Stark is also a victim, and he is completely unaware of the arms trafficking. He was even betrayed by his own company in Afghanistan and almost died. If Arno had not returned today and saved Tony Stark, he might have died directly. And the betrayers in the company that Arno cleared were his real enemies. The reason why Arno invited 2 surgeons was to perform surgery on Tony, who survived the attack in Afghanistan. Now that he knows the truth and understands everything, his revenge is finally avenged. Wanda felt empty in her heart, feeling a sense of unreality. Although the Stark family was not the initiator, and Arno was not aware of it. But she still couldn't let go of the past completely and face Arno as if nothing had happened. Arno gently kissed Wanda's forehead and put her down from his arms. It's okay, I know this matter is hard to accept for a while, you don't need to tell me the answer now, go back and have a good rest for a night, and tell me your thoughts tomorrow. Then he looked at the side door of the restaurant. Pietro, I believe you have heard it, and you too, tell me the answer tomorrow, and go back to adapt to your abilities, now take your sister back to have a good rest. Pietro, who was at the door, walked in, lowering his eyes, making it impossible to see through his mood. He didn't speak, and turned into a silver shadow and took Wanda away. I hope they can think clearly. Arno looked at them and didn't go back to the room, but left the manor, and the gradually receding figures of the brother and sister murmured to themselves. Toot, toot, on the roof of Stark Tower. A pervert in a red tights, wearing pink headphones, listening to Peppa Pig's children's music, is swinging his legs in the air to the rhythm. It hums a little tune, looks at the information in its hand, and looks relaxed. The pervert suddenly turns to face the void. Wow, which handsome kid is here to read this super good-looking book again? What? You ask me what I'm doing? This is a secret, I can't tell you. The pervert's expression is sometimes funny, sometimes serious. Okay, I'll tell you, here is the outline of the script that the author secretly gave me. Surprise, do you want to know how I got the author to give me the script? Come here, I'll tell you quietly. Of course, I lied to you, ha 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 ha, you've been fooled, little idiot. The pervert in tights points at the void and laughs wildly. Oh, don't cross it out, please don't cross it out, otherwise the author will think that I am unpopular and will write me to death. Let me tell you, this is actually my mission assassination list. Oh, by the way, did I forget to introduce myself? You can call me Wade, of course I prefer my other terrifying name. The pervert in tights looked at the void with a serious expression. It was really strange. He was wearing a mask but you could still feel his rich expression. Deadpool. The crow flew across the night, blowing a wisp of awkward wind. Forget that you can't give applause, otherwise I'm sure, I said this cool line, you must have cheered loudly at this moment. Okay, let's not waste any more time, let's take a look at our mission objectives today. Wade took out 2 documents, and the dog approached the void stealthily. Let me tell you a secret, in fact, these 2 missions were issued a few months ago, but the 2 guys couldn't find anyone, so they were delayed. It was definitely not because I went to the next studio for a big health check and forgot. Ahem, let's get to the point. Tony Stark, this guy disappeared in Afghanistan a few months ago, I don't want to go to that place where even dogs will be shot to assassinate a steel shell. So let's see who's next, Arno Stark. Look, who is this? Isn't this the famous real son of Stark, Howard's biological son, the vegetable Arno? Why does this guy look different from the comics, as strong as if he can kill Tyson with 1 punch? Author, you want me to beat this guy? Quote. Deadpool looked at the image of Arno's suit thug in the file and exaggeratedly opened his stinky mouth. What should I do? What should I do? He looks so strong. I'm so nervous. Deadpool stood up and covered his mouth, pacing nervously with his feet tapping back and forth. When you thought he was thinking of a countermeasure, he stopped unexpectedly, looked from between his legs to behind his crotch, and pulled out 2 large caliber Desert Eagles from his waist and made a big rock spread wings. He said in a weird posture, I lied to you again. Under my .508 caliber bullet, the elephant has to do a pole dance for me before it can leave. I guarantee to win. The night was as cold as the wind, just like the pretentious Wade. Unfortunately, there was no audience at the scene to appreciate his coquettish posture. At least there was no audience in this world. Okay, good night, everyone. I'm going home to have a beauty sleep. Look forward to my bravery in the Batcave tomorrow and taking down the eldest son of the Stark family. Love you, Marua. Deadpool raised his hand and blew a kiss, took a step back, and jumped down from the Stark Tower with a handsome leap of faith. Bang! Ah! Wade slept soundly with a loud bang of a heavy object falling to the ground and an even louder female scream. That night, the free New York City was still, peaceful. Except for some masked men running around in the dark, hundreds of shootings and drug addicts in the dark, well, everything was peaceful. In this free and peaceful atmosphere, the night faded and the sun rose. Normal people can also go out of the house, have a cup of coffee, and embrace a new day of social life. Stark Manor also gradually unfolded its vitality like the warm morning sun. The maids smiled happily and began to prepare breakfast. In the huge garden, a figure in a white training suit slowly practiced Tai Chi. A burst of applause came, and Arno came over wearing simple black shorts and a white short-sleeved shirt, clapping his hands. Chen's Tai Chi is very good. Chen Jun finished his training and stood at attention, looking at the tall figure who was dressed simply but could not hide his majestic temperament like a lone mountain peak, and smiled. Is Mr. Stark also interested in Chinese Kung Fu? I have been fortunate to learn some real Kung Fu. If you are interested, I would be happy to teach you. He had a good impression of the arms tycoon in front of him who was born in capital but was kind-hearted and had a good understanding and respect for Chinese culture, so he didn't mind teaching him some real skills. Arno looked at Chen Jun unexpectedly. He didn't expect that he was an ordinary doctor, but there was an unexpected surprise. But he still shook his head. No, although Chinese Kung Fu is good, it doesn't help me. Well, that's a pity. I see that you have a high level of talent, and practicing Kung Fu will definitely get twice the result with half the effort. Chen Jun didn't persuade much after hearing this. thinking that Arno meant that he didn't need to do it himself because of his status, but it was a pity that Arno's martial arts talent was visible to the naked eye. Arno did not explain. He knew that with his own strength, the so-called martial arts or other fighting skills could not help him much. He only needed to master simple fighting skills. His random punch under absolute strength was more effective than any fighting skills in the world. Chen, how did you and Steven prepare yesterday? When it came to business, Chen Jun's expression became serious. We were well prepared, and there were basically no problems. Steven is indeed a surgical genius. With the cooperation of him and me, we can have a success rate of 99%, not 100%. Now we just have to wait for Steven to wake up and the patient to arrive to start the operation. Arno nodded with satisfaction. 99%, that's okay. In his opinion, an operation with a success rate of less than 90% is a suicide, and he would not let Tony do it. If it was 99%, there would be basically no problem. Arno took out his mobile phone and called Tony. For a long time. Beep beep beep. Arno was silent for a while and called again. Beep, beep. Arno turned his head and looked into the distance, only to see Tony hammering away at the basement of his villa, his cell phone still in the bedroom on the second floor. Very good. Let him prepare for the surgery the next day. You totally forgot about it, right? He turned around and called Pepper's cell phone. Boss. Arno, is there anything? Pepper, who was rushing to Tony's villa, answered Arno's call while driving. Hearing Pepper's calm tone, Arno knew that she had overcome the psychological barrier. What a shit luck, Tony. Arno sighed at Tony's bad luck again in his heart. Pepper, you are going to Tony's villa now. He is in the basement. When you get there, ask him to come to my manor immediately to prepare for the surgery. Tell him that if he doesn't come within 2 hours, I will restore the scrap copper and iron he made to its original state. Pepper was flustered when he heard this. Surgery? What surgery? Is Tony injured? After taking a few deep breaths, her strong psychological quality and professional ethics made her choose not to ask at this time. I understand. I will ask Tony to come over immediately. Well, thank you for your hard work. And step on the brakes now, and leave in half a minute. After saying that, Arno hung up the phone. Pepper was a little confused when she heard this, but she stopped the car after seeing that there was no car behind her. Buzz. Just a few seconds after she stopped, a heavy truck driving in the opposite direction drove out at the sharp turn in front, which made Pepper understand what Arno meant. She stared blankly at the heavy truck passing by her, swallowed her saliva, and her back was wet with cold sweat. This sharp turn of the mountain road could not see the situation ahead at all. If Arno had not reminded her just now, she would have collided with the heavy truck. But how did he know? Beep beep beep. A burst of rapid horn sounds interrupted her thinking, and the car behind was already urging her. She had to put aside her doubts and stepped on the gas. The door drove towards Tony's house. Arno, who was far away in the manor, saw that Pepper was safe and sound, so he retracted his gaze. He was very satisfied with this sister-in-law, and she was worth his attention. So even if Pepper didn't listen to him and continued to move forward, Arno would not watch her die. He could also save Pepper and even her Audi before the vehicle hit. Chen, go have breakfast first. The patient is estimated to take 2 or 3 hours to arrive. After breakfast, we will play chess with me. We will start when he arrives. There is a specially prepared operating room in the manor. Chen Jun certainly had no objection. Just follow Mr. Stark's arrangement. The restaurant in that building was messed up by Wanda yesterday, and it was still being cleaned up. So the two chatted and walked towards another restaurant. Arno was having a good chat, while Deadpool on the other side was full. Brother San, you mean your car is out of gas, and I have to walk to Stark Manor, which is more than 10 kilometers away, right? Deadpool, wearing a red tights, picked up the honest and simple Indian driver. The Indian driver looked at the double knives and pistols behind Deadpool, and raised his hands very skillfully. Sorry sir, all the money was robbed from my last order last night, so I have no money to refuel. I wanted to use the money from the first order today to refuel, but I didn't expect you to go so far. Wardfa, but it's less than 10 kilometers out of the city. How far is it? The person who robbed me yesterday also took most of the gas in my car. Deadpool was speechless now. This unlucky child. Boy, You don't even have a gun to be a driver in America. Who else can I rob? Remember to bring a gun next time. Deadpool threw the Indian driver into the yellow taxi and walked forward along the road angrily. He kept whispering to comfort himself. Just think of it as a morning walk. I just had indigestion after eating the breakfast made by the blind old woman. Just think of it as a morning run to help digestion. The Indian guy looked at Deadpool, who was walking and kicking stones on the roadside angrily, and said weakly, "Sir." Deadpool drew his knife and turned back angrily. "Shut up. I'm in a good mood to let you go today. If you dare to say another word, I will stuff you into the anus of the Indian lizard." The Indian guy covered his mouth when he heard this. After all, he was a mixed blood, not a pure-blooded Indian, and he didn't like to have any close contact with lizards. He kept cursing until he had walked 10 kilometers, and Deadpool suddenly looked back in horror. "Alashette, my weapon bag." He squatted on the ground with his head in his hands in pain, and then he remembered that he had forgotten his beloved weapon bag. Although it was just a bag of weapons, it was not only because it was the equipment needed to attack Stark Manor, but also because it was all his belongings. Now all was lost, and he only had 2 pistols and 2 knives left. Sadness comes quickly, and it goes faster for Deadpool. After a while, he patted his butt and got up as if nothing had happened, with a small yellow flower picked by the roadside in his fingers. "I use this little chrysanthemum to commemorate my deceased lovers. I hope that Indian lizard can treat you well, otherwise I swear I will shove his head into the Ganges to let him know what it means to be covered in shit." After mourning his deceased lovers, Deadpool continued to walk on the road without recognizing any relatives. "This place, I walked for 2 hours and I couldn't even see a car." Buzz buzz buzz. As soon as the voice fell, a supercar passed by Deadpool at high speed like a silver lightning, and the speed was so fast that his hood was almost blown off. "Are you in a hurry to send warmth to God? Don't let me meet you again, I remember your license plate." Deadpool grabbed his beloved red hood and sent a cordial greeting to the sports car that was going away. "Oh my God, Tony, slow down, you almost hit someone just now." Little Pepper tightened the armrest, looking at the dashboard with the number of digits already fried and feeling terrified. "Don't worry, I know my limits, I won't hit that Disney clown, but if I don't hurry up, Arno will really turn my Mark II into molten iron." Tony calmly controlled the steering wheel with one hand, and took a bite of the cheeseburger he bought on the road with the other hand. Amid the roar of the sports car, Arno and Chen Jun put down the chess pieces in their hands and looked at the sports car that drove into the manor. Steven, who was watching the game and rubbing his mouth because of the delicious breakfast, also looked over. There was a loud bang in the sky, and the patient made a brilliant appearance. The car door opened, and Tony and Little Pepper, whose legs were weak, got out of the car. Tony took off his sunglasses and winked at the 3 people. "How is it, the protagonist is not late?" Arno glanced at his watch. "I am 10 minutes late, but considering that you will suffer for the next month, let's forget it this time." Tony pursed his lips and said nothing. Although he was spared, he was not happy at all. Of course he knew what Arno meant. Even if the operation was successful, the big hole in his chest would not be completely healed in a short time, and he would have to endure the next recuperation period. If he wants to recover quickly, the nanomedical technology that is still in the concept has to be successfully developed. Thinking of this, Tony suddenly had an idea in his brain. If nanotechnology and Mark armor are combined, it must be very interesting. "Come back to your senses, it's time to take off the big light bulb on your chest." Arno interrupted Tony's new idea. "Not shit. Is this the doctor you found for me? This mustache looks familiar." Tony looked at Chen Jun and Steven, thinking. Steven said with a hint of sarcasm, "Hey, it's normal for a famous playboy not to remember a nobody like me. After all, if I was like you hugging 2 supermodels at the party, I wouldn't remember the other people at the party." Tony raised his eyebrows and looked at the mustache. "Oh, are you mocking me, Sherlock Holmes?" Arno held his forehead helplessly. "Okay, Tony, shut up. Steven is your deputy attending physician today. Your life is still in his hands. Can't you control your stinky mouth?" Chen Jun's gentle voice soothed everyone's emotions. "Gentlemen, since the patient is in place, let's start as soon as possible. After all, this operation is not a small project. Well, let's go to the medical room." Arno nodded and took the lead to walk forward. It's better to say it's a small hospital than a medical room. A 5-story villa was transformed into the exclusive medical room of the manor. It was transformed from the former military base health center. It has complete facilities. The villa has everything that the hospital has, and the villa has everything that the hospital doesn't have. Thanks again to the generosity of the Americans. In the spacious operating room, Tony has taken off his clothes and is lying on the bed. In addition to Chen Jun and Steven, who have changed into surgical gowns, there are 5 professionals in the operating room to help the two. Outside the large one-way floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass window, Arno and Pepper are looking at the several people who have already started anesthesia. The medical villa has begun martial law, and no one is allowed to approach and disturb. Arno said lightly, and the maid behind him nodded slightly and retreated. Arno, will Tony be okay? Little Pepper looked at Tony, who was gradually losing consciousness, and worried. Don't worry, the success rate is 99%, and don't worry about the remaining 1%, I will take action. Arno said calmly. Holmes, and this Chinese doctor who looks very reliable, my life is in your hands. At the end of the anesthesia, Tony looked at the two people with a confused consciousness and murmured. Shut up, Tony shit Tucker. Steven couldn't stand this difference in treatment anymore, and the amount of anesthetic in his hand increased slightly, causing Tony to faint completely. Chen Jun glanced at Steven. Young man, keep a calm mind. He's not talking about you, so of course you should keep a calm mind. Let's get started. Steven rolled his eyes at him, activated the magnetic attraction above, and began to remove the reactor from Tony's chest. On the other side, the Joker, no, Mr. Deadpool, who had been busy for nearly 3 hours, panted and saw the address of his mission target today. Stark Manor. Rich man, living in such a remote location. Wait for me to kill you, burn this place, let this manor be buried with you, and continue to live in hell. Deadpool walked towards the manor with a curse. But when he got closer and looked at the city wall, that was 7 or 8 meters high and covered with ferocious electric grids on top, he fell into deep thought. Wardfake, is this a manor or a military base? Is it necessary to be so strict? Deadpool was so angry that he laughed. If his weapon bag hadn't fallen on the taxi, he would have blown up this broken city wall. Taking a deep breath, Deadpool's mask revealed an ugly smile. Since the plan to sneak into the investigator failed, let's activate Plan B. Go in. Wade took out his 2 favorite guns and walked towards the manor gate like a lone hero. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Wade pressed the doorbell frantically, trying to break the doorbell that looked very valuable. Sir, what can I do for you? This is private territory. Please don't press the doorbell if you don't have anything else. Leave as soon as possible. A pleasant female voice came from the microphone next to the doorbell, which made Deadpool look over. He approached the camera next to the microphone and greeted. Hello, I'm here to visit your master, Arno Stark. I'm his good friend. Then do you have an appointment? The manor is closed today. If you don't have anything important, please come another day. And, please don't press the doorbell. The female voice in the microphone was obviously speechless. This pervert in red tights doesn't look like the master's friend. How could the master know such a pervert? I won't. If you don't open the door for me, I'll keep ringing. Deadpool stomped his feet like a child and continued to ring the doorbell frantically, as if he would smash your doorbell if you didn't open the door. Fake assassination. Sneak in silently and solve the target neatly. Real assassination. Smash the opponent's doorbell, forcing the opponent to open the door, then rush in and kill everyone in a high-profile manner. Click. The iron door opened, and Deadpool smiled proudly at the void. See, audience, my method is still effective. The real infiltration often uses the simplest method. Learned it. Click, click, click. Deadpool's smile froze in the sound of loading, and he slowly turned his head to look at the maids who came to greet him. Of course, if they didn't hold the loaded tactical assault rifles in their hands, so many maids might have made Deadpool a little excited. I'll say it again, private territory, leave immediately. A clear and pleasant voice came from the leading maid, but Deadpool couldn't help but complain. You actually use maids for security, is your master a pervert who likes to play role-playing? Master Stark fighting a maid with a gun. I have to say that you really can't imagine the happiness of rich people. Now, unload your weapons, lie on the ground, immediately. The maids couldn't help hearing their gods being insulted like this, and all aimed at Deadpool's stinky mouth. Sorry ladies, there is no word surrender in my dictionary. Deadpool smiled crookedly, slowly pulled out the two swords behind him, and crossed them in front of him to form an X shape. Bang, dang, with a gunshot, the maids widened their eyes. Deadpool split the bullets and smiled coldly. I can catch all the bullets. You'd better lie on the ground and surrender, waiting for the whipping of Master Deadpool. Cadden. With a crisp sound, Deadpool was showing off, and he was scared to death when he saw the round ball rolling under his feet. Shit, you have no martial ethics. Boom. The maids who had been hiding behind the bunker for a long time got up after the grenade exploded. The leading maid made a gesture, and they dispersed into the dust and smoke of the explosion and surrounded it. Green lasers shone on the motionless Deadpool. Captain, he seems to be dead. A maid who looked younger said as she looked at Deadpool, who was covered in blood and even had a leg blown off. Well, it looks like he is dead. Bang, bang, 2 shots to the torso and 1 shot to the head, and Death came and shook his head. Looking at the stunned expression of the young maid, the maid captain who led the reshooting said indifferently, "The master said that we should reshoot the enemy, not let him die, but let him die thoroughly. The task is done," and he left, hiding his identity and name. After the maid captain finished reshooting, she turned around and walked towards the manor without looking back. The other maids pulled the young maid who had not yet recovered and followed her as if they were used to it. But it is true that even the god of death would shake his head when such reshooting came. But unfortunately, the god of death just didn't want this pervert in red tights. He has a golden ticket to avoid death in front of death. Hey, girls, are you leaving without saying hello? An unpleasant voice like a broken wind machine came from behind the maids. They immediately turned around and aimed their guns vigilantly. The incomplete Deadpool actually stood up slowly, and his incomplete parts were growing continuously. The unpleasant sound like breaking the wind came from his throat where the granulation was growing alternately. The maid team looked at this horrible scene in horror. What kind of monster is this? Shoot, shoot immediately. The captain shouted and shot directly. The other maids reacted quickly and covered the firepower directly. Bang bang bang, dang dang dang. The bullets rained down like raindrops, but Deadpool, who had returned from death, became extremely brave, swinging his 2 swords tightly and blocking most of the bullets. Even if a bullet hit him occasionally, it could not stop him from moving forward. Just as Deadpool was getting closer and closer, and was about to rush into the crowd to start the massacre, a slender long leg kicked Deadpool away as he was about to insert his 2 swords into the bodies of the 2 maids. It's not fair for a superpower to deal with a group of ordinary people. A red-haired phantom wearing a black tight combat suit and a curvy figure walked out from behind the maids and smiled charmingly at Deadpool. You said it, Deadpool, or Mr. Wade Wilson. The huge force made Deadpool slide back a distance, and he stopped when his 2 knives were inserted into the ground. He looked at the red-haired beauty in front of him and screamed exaggeratedly. Wow, 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 did I enter the wrong script? How come there is a senior agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., the famous Black Widow, in the billionaire's Batcave? Why, S.H.I.E.L.D. is short of funds, and wants you to seduce this billionaire so that Black Egg can build a few more safe houses. Natasha didn't care about Wade's low-level provocation. Her identity here has never been a secret. In front of the man with red eyes sitting in the sky, she knew that lying in front of him was equal to death when they met for the first time. So as early as when she came here, Arno knew everything about her. Sure enough, the other maids were unmoved by Deadpool's provocation. Instructor, how should we deal with this man? The maid captain bowed her head and asked Natasha for instructions. His ability is very special, ordinary guns are useless, you stay on guard, and I will deal with him. Natasha pulled out 2 electric batons from behind, smiled at Deadpool, and swooped down. I can't kill you, but that doesn't mean I can't shock you. Natasha's 2 beautiful big eyes seemed to be able to speak, and Wade instantly understood what she meant in her eyes. A good man doesn't fight with a woman, but who makes me a bad guy? Deadpool's double swords flashed with a sharp cold light, and he rushed towards Natasha unwilling to be outdone. Bang! Arno watched the little farce outside the manor with interest, and did not intend to take action himself. If the manor's chief combat instructor, Natasha Romanoff, could not even deal with this clown in a red tights, then she could just resign and give up her position. If she had not been attracted by her combat skills and had no bad intentions when she sneaked into her manor, she would have been a corpse long ago. As for why he knew that she had no bad intentions, it was because under his kind eyes shining with red light, Natasha honestly explained her identity and why she sneaked into the manor. Natasha Romanoff, the 7th level agent from the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency, the Black Widow. But she sneaked into Stark Manor not because of the so-called Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency's mission. Instead, she accidentally discovered many missing orphans around the world, and then found Stark Manor based on clues. Even when she was investigating the information of Stark Manor, her director had warned her not to investigate the matter any further, let alone to provoke Arno Stark. But obviously, she did not listen to the advice. As for the reason, it may be related to her own past. Looking at these missing girls, she couldn't help but think of the place that frightened her. Red House. Only after being caught in the rain did she understand the importance of having an umbrella. Only those who have experienced the cruel training and torture of the girls in the Red House can understand the horror. She couldn't let other girls like her fall into the same fate as her. And even if Arno didn't capture those girls to train them to be killers, Natasha guessed that it was definitely not a good thing. After all, what good intentions could a billionaire have when he took away a large number of orphans? No matter what the reason was, Natasha had a reason to go. So she resolutely went to the Dragon Hall and Tiger's Den that the director had repeatedly warned her not to go to. Of course, the result also made her dumbfounded. Not only did she get grabbed by the neck by a tall figure that fell from the sky as soon as she sneaked in. Later, she discovered that the girls she thought had suffered unbearable torture were actually living a beautiful and happy life in the manor. Arno Stark, who thought he was a pervert, never forced the girls in the manor to do things they didn't want to do. On the contrary, if the girls were not yet adults, Arno would use his connections to send them to school. And after they become adults, they can freely choose to leave or stay in the manor to work. Of course, most girls will return to the manor after graduation. Because this place has long been their home for them. Even if some go out to work, it is generally because they are too outstanding. Arno does not want to bury their talents, and arranges them to go to a stage where they can show their talents. Arno took them out of the sea of suffering and gave them a good education and a beautiful and free life. Therefore, the girls are full of admiration and love for Arno. For the maids in the manor, Arno is their god and faith. Natasha was a little dazed when she first heard about this from the girls. It even flashed through her mind that if she had met Arno when she was a child, her life would have been very different. Later, in order to atone for the crime of breaking into Stark Manor without permission and the inexplicable envy she felt for this place, she chose to stay. As a combat instructor, memories flowed by like flowing water. Natasha's double sticks collided with Deadpool's double knives, sparking. Although Deadpool's knife skills were sharp, every knife was deadly and insidious. But Natasha was not a pushover. With her superb skills and the physique enhanced in the Red House, she even overpowered Deadpool in simple close combat. Especially when the electric baton in her hand slightly restrained the long knife in Deadpool's hand. Natasha even took control of the main attack. As the saying goes, long defense leads to loss. After blocking Natasha's electric baton again, Deadpool suddenly raised his head to dodge. A bullet emitting electric light almost brushed his nose and burned his red mask black. Hidden weapon. What a baby's woman, ah. Deadpool just revealed a small flaw when dodging the electric bullet shot from Natasha's arm. Natasha immediately seized the opportunity and turned the electric baton to the maximum. The electric head touched the long knife that Deadpool had no time to dodge, and instantly shocked him to dance to the electronic music of pole dance. But just like this, Deadpool's incredible recovery ability cannot directly take him down. Natasha's purpose is not to take down Deadpool in this way, but to create an opportunity for her next move. The seductive phantom follows Deadpool's body, like a python, wrapped around Deadpool and strangled him in a naked choke at the moment he was electrocuted. Crack. Natasha locked Deadpool and took advantage of the situation. The arm that locked Deadpool's neck burst out with maximum strength. Before Deadpool recovered from the electric shock, she strangled his Adam's apple. Then she rolled over and picked up the long knife that fell to the ground when Deadpool was strangled, and raised it high and chopped it down in one go before he recovered. Swish, crack, a big head rolled to the ground. Natasha walked gracefully, picked up Deadpool's head and took off his mask. Looking at this face that looked like it had been fried, he smiled slightly. Don't pretend, you won't die so easily. The ugly face in Natasha's hand opened its eyes in vain. You are worthy of being the Black Widow, you are really merciless, after all, we are also friends who have fought together several times, you are so ruthless. Natasha raised her eyebrows and sneered. If you mean that you kept making trouble when I was performing the mission and said it was a joint operation, then I can only say that I would rather not have your assistance. Ahem, that time was an accident, but it was your black-boiled egg director who personally hired you and me to play a sweet double row, so you can't blame me completely, right? And I am half of your shield, we are all one of us, can you put my head back to my body, I can't even do lol without my hands, so pitiful. Deadpool's head looked at Natasha pitifully. Unfortunately, his face is so ugly now that it not only did not make Natasha feel pity, but also made her feel a little nauseous. Oh, yes, if you hadn't told me, I would have forgotten your body. Natasha showed a wicked smile, and Deadpool's heart skipped a beat. You, what are you going to do? You're not going to do anything bad to my body, are you? Deadpool looked at Natasha shyly. Natasha's mouth twitched, and she had to admit that one day she would lose to a person in the mouth. That's not right, in her eyes, this person is not even a person, just like a mutant Shar-Pei dog. Natasha no longer paid attention to Deadpool, and hooked her finger at the maids who were on guard next to her, and a maid came forward immediately. Bring the gasoline barrels, let's give Mr. Wilson a passionate fire bath. 2 large barrels of gasoline were poured on, and Deadpool's body immediately became as beautiful as a lotus. Natasha held Deadpool's head with one hand and took out a cigarette with the other hand. The maid next to her immediately lit it for her. Deadpool's eyelids twitched wildly. Can we discuss this again? How about I give you the employer's information and you let go of my body? Huh, Natasha took a deep breath of smoke and blew it on Deadpool's face, squinting her eyes. You know, women are very vengeful. I've wanted to burn you for a long time, so enjoy your fire bath. Wait, at least take off my battle suit for me, I only have this one. Unfortunately, women sometimes don't have sensitive ears. For example, now, Natasha flicked her finger, and the burning cigarette fell accurately on Deadpool's body. Beacon. The fierce flames instantly erupted and engulfed the headless body of the red tights. No, snowflakes fluttered, the north wind whistled. Deadpool looked at his burning body in pain. No, my body, my battle suit, my dick. No. Shut up. Natasha's face darkened when she heard the last part. Stuff a grenade into Deadpool's mouth, blocking his stinky mouth. Look at this body. If it doesn't turn into ash after the flames are extinguished, continue to burn it until it turns into ash. Okay, instructor. After Natasha gave her instructions, she took Deadpool's bald head and walked into the manor. Even though Deadpool's mouth was blocked, he still couldn't stop talking and kept making sounds. And Natasha happened to have received special training and could understand the general meaning of the sounds made by people when their mouths were blocked. Just like now, Deadpool is asking, "Vicious Spider Woman, where are you taking the family?" "Your boudoir." "Of course I'm taking you to see the person you want to see, the owner of this manor, Arno Stark." Natasha looked at Deadpool's head with a mocking and disdainful look in her eyes. To assassinate Arno Stark, what a bold idea. I really don't know whether it is ignorance or simple stupidity. This god of the world is not something that humans can kill. Natasha's eyes were inexplicable. "Master, Instructor Romanov wants to see you. She brought the invader this time. Do you want her to come in?" A maid in red and white maid uniforms, which was obviously different from the black and white maid uniforms outside, walked behind Arno and asked softly. "Let her in." Arno looked at the shrapnel that had been taken out of Tony's body without looking back, and he breathed a sigh of relief. After the shrapnel was taken out, the next step was the finishing stage. As long as he rested well, his brother's life would be saved. Not long after, a beautiful figure walked in with a head. "Master, this is the intruder this time, Wade Wilson, a self-healing superpower, codenamed Deadpool, a guy who specializes in underground black assassination missions and chores. Natasha bowed her head respectfully and presented the head in her hand to Arno. Pepper looked at the curious head in Natasha's hand and almost vomited. If it weren't for her extraordinary professional quality, she would have screamed out loud. Now even if she didn't scream out loud, she couldn't bear to look at Tony in the operating room. Compared with Deadpool's head that looked like it had been fried, the big hole in Tony's chest looked so fresh. Deadpool widened his eyes and saw Arno and Tony, who was in surgery and looked very excited. Arno didn't know Natasha's mumbling, and his large palm easily pinched Deadpool's head and held it in his hand. Tell me, who asked you to assassinate me? Woo 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 woo. Deadpool rolled his eyes and showed the grenade in his mouth, indicating that he couldn't speak. Arno pinched the grenade with 2 fingers, but unexpectedly, there was a click when he took it out. Looking at the grenade in his hand that had been pulled out of the safety and released the firing pin, Arno had no expression on his face. Even except for Pepper's face of horror, the other people present, whether it was the red maid guarding beside or Natasha, did not show any panic. Arno closed his big hand and directly wrapped the grenade. Bang! A muffled sound came from Arno's palm. He spread his palm, only to see that his palm was unscathed, with only a palm of grenade fragments. Interesting, the tongue is quite flexible, open your mouth. Arno looked down at the stunned Deadpool on his right hand and sneered. The information is wrong, didn't they say that the Stark brothers were just ordinary people? At most, Arno looks stronger. But this guy can hold a grenade in his palm and explode without any injury. Is he an ordinary person? You ordinary people, Deadpool cursed his employer in his heart. He showed an awkward smile and winked at Arno. Brother, I said I was careless, do you believe it? Arno smiled but said nothing, holding the fragment and raised a finger to Deadpool. Deadpool looked shocked. Ah, do you want to do it to my head? Oh my god. I didn't expect you to have such a fetish, then you have to be gentle. Arno paused, and the smile on his face disappeared. Then he flicked his raised index finger, and Deadpool's lips and teeth were instantly shattered. Arno stuffed all the fragments in his palm into Deadpool's stinky mouth that was forced to open. Then he forced his cracked jaw closed. I'll give you one last chance. Who hired you? Faced with Arno's colder eyes, the fearless Deadpool shuddered. He had a bad feeling that even if he was immortal, he would be killed by the person in front of him. Although this feeling made Deadpool, he felt it was ridiculous. After all, he had tried countless ways to commit suicide, but never succeeded. Even if he was blown into a meat paste as broken as Lao Gan Ma, he would recover, the only difference was the length of time. Although he often committed suicide, it did not mean that he was willing to die like this. Deadpool, whose mouth had recovered, became righteous. I have been in the underworld for so long, do you think I am a traitor? Do you know what my motto is when I am in the underworld? Natasha said silently. Selling out brothers, backstabbing fellow villagers, sleeping with the beauty sister-in-law. Shut up, woman, Deadpool yelled, and then showed Arno a flattering smile. It's eye contact. To be honest, from the moment I saw your majestic figure and handsome face for the first time, I was almost excited to GC. I didn't expect someone to be so compatible with me. We are so close. We are like half-brothers. Arno raised Deadpool's head with a smile and looked at him at eye level. Oh. You are really excited because you saw the commission on me and Tony. One grenade can get a double kill. Deadpool smiled awkwardly. Hee, of course not, a mere 20 million, for me, it's nothing. Tony and I are only worth 10 million. Interesting. He was not surprised that someone hired a killer to assassinate him and Tony, but wasn't it a bit insulting to only pay 10 million per person? Enough of small talk, tell me, your employer. Deadpool seemed very sincere. Okay, it's Obadiah Stani, if I remember correctly, that's the name. After hearing this, Arno looked at Deadpool with a strange look in his eyes. Deadpool smiled sincerely. I'm not lying, it's really him, he even paid half of the commission first. I can give you the account information, I believe you can find out if it's true with your means. Arno threw Deadpool's head to Natasha. No need, but don't want the other half of your commission. Ah, why? Lock him up and start working after he recovers. Ah, what kind of work? Is there a salary? How is the treatment? Is there insurance? As Deadpool kept talking, Natasha carried him out. Soon, the operating room was opened. Stephen and Chen Jun came out. The operation was successfully completed, and all you have to do next is rest for a while. Stephen took off his mask and smiled triumphantly at Arno. Arno also smiled. Thank you for your help this time. I owe you a favor this time. If you need any help in the future, just tell me. Stephen and Chen Jun couldn't help but smile when they heard it. The favor of the eldest son of the Stark family is very useful. It can even be used to save lives at critical moments, and they can't help but be tempted. But what they don't know is that this favor is far more useful than they imagined. Because this is not only the favor of the person in charge of the world's largest arms group. It is also the favor of a god. Chen Jun knew that there was nothing for them to do next, and said tactfully, since the operation has been completed, Stephen and I will not disturb the reunion of you two brothers, and we will leave now. Arno nodded when he heard Chen Jun's words. After all, he had delayed them for a long time by hastily asking the two to come. For world-class surgeons like them, the patients waiting for their surgery are basically scheduled until next year. The two of them came immediately after receiving his call, which was already a face for him. Otherwise, even if it was Tony, he might not be able to call these two people without an appointment. Well, then I won't keep you two for a while, Kaya, send you two off for me. After the red-dressed maid took the two out, Arno did not disturb Tony, who was still unconscious, but frowned and looked to the north. Pepper, you stay here and take care of Tony, I'll go take care of some things. Before Pepper could reply, Arno's figure had disappeared. Far north of Stark Manor, the border of Sokovia, a man and a woman covered in wounds, supporting each other and fleeing forward. The whistling sound of helicopters behind them was heard, and a large number of armored vehicles were also driving towards them quickly. Wanda, go first, don't worry about me. I will only be a burden to you. Go to the manor to find Brother Arno. He will definitely protect you. Pietro covered his thigh that was pierced by the trap and shouted to Wanda, who was standing in front of him with a red light in her hand. No, I won't abandon you, just like you never thought of abandoning me as a burden before. Wanda looked straight ahead with a firm look in her eyes. In front of them, a large number of fully armed fighters with guns were approaching the two brothers and sisters. There were several armed helicopters hovering in the sky. The sky and the ground were surrounded. As for why Pietro and Wanda were hunted down and attacked, the story started after the two left the manor yesterday. At Pietro's extreme speed, he took Wanda back to their hometown. Sokovia, the hometown they used to be. But more than 10 years have passed, and everything has changed. And there is no home here anymore. A small high-rise building was rebuilt on the site of their original home. It looks much better than their previous home. The people here are much happier than they were then. At least, there is no war. The two came to the roof of their former home, leaning on each other and being a little dazed at the peaceful Sokovia in front of them. Wanda looked at the children playing carefree on the street and murmured, Pietro, look, the people in Sokovia now seem to have forgotten the war. Don't they hate it? When she was a child, wasn't what she wanted most to be able to play outside with her brother without worrying about being shot at any time? But, it has only been more than 10 years, don't they hate it anymore? Hate war, and hate the demons who have taken away their loved ones because of the war. Wasn't it with this hatred that she and her brother left their hometown and embarked on the road to seek revenge? But the enemy they once thought was too powerful. Two helpless orphans are like ants trying to shake a tree when facing the giant Stark. What makes them even more desperate is that in that country that rejects discrimination and freedom and equality, it seems extremely difficult for them to survive, not to mention revenge on the country's top arms dealer. But, at the same time of despair, hope also quietly comes. Destruction and redemption, coincidentally originated from Stark. Pietro smiled with relief. They hate, but they understand that hatred can't help them get revenge. Unlike us, they choose to accept reality. Wanda, Brother Arnold is right. There is no right or wrong in weapons. The wrong thing is to provoke war in those who use weapons. Although the weapons of Stark Industries appeared in the hands of the rebels because of Tony Stark's mismanagement. But in the final analysis, this is not his will, and he also paid the price for his mismanagement. Quote, and Brother Arnold, you and I both know that he had completely handed over Stark Industries to Tony Stark at that time, and I'm afraid he was not even on Earth at that time. Brother Arnold is very special and perfect. He saved many orphans like us. We shouldn't involve this hatred on him." Pietro's words were like the last straw, completely letting Wanda let go of her hatred for Stark. She showed a sunny smile and her tone became lighter. "Let's go home, brother." Quote. After untying the knot in her heart, she couldn't wait to see the person who brought them hope and whom she loved deeply. However, before Pietro could answer, Wanda's hair stood up, and the power of chaos in her body was frantically warning. Wanda looked up suddenly, and a missile was falling rapidly from the sky towards them. Just like when she was a child. But, she is no longer the little girl who could only watch the missile fall and wait for death. She is Scarlet Witch. The deep red energy is like a giant net that stops the missile with powerful kinetic energy in midair. Ah! Quote. With a roar, Wanda completely expressed her anger from childhood. The missile was pushed high into the sky by the crimson energy, and then a violent explosion occurred. Wanda took a long breath and saw several armed helicopters flying towards them in the distance before she could catch her breath. Wanda immediately yelled at the stunned Pietro. "Pietro, we have to leave the city. They are coming for us. If we stay in the city, it will cause huge casualties." Pietro came to his senses and immediately picked up Wanda without hesitation, turning into a silver shadow and quickly leaving the city. After leaving the city, Pietro turned his head and looked at the armed helicopters that were chasing him and said angrily, "Who are they and why are they attacking us?" Wanda shook her head and guessed, "I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with our awakened ability. We must avoid their pursuit as soon as possible. Don't worry, they can't catch up with us." Quote. Pietro smiled confidently. Although he had just awakened, he was full of confidence in his speed. This was indeed the case. In a blink of an eye, the armed helicopter could not even see Pietro's taillights. But the armed helicopter seemed to know their route. It turned its nose and quickly chased in the direction they fled. A secret castle. A man wearing a cyclops was looking at the image on the screen with fanatic eyes. The image was the scene of Wanda controlling the missile and Pietro taking her away at a high speed. Baron Strucker's voice was a little hoarse with excitement. Superpowers, one of them is a magic side superpower with an extremely high energy index. At all costs, I must catch them for me. Behind him, a small-eyed middle-aged dwarf smiled confidently, exactly like Pietro just now. He held the tablet-like instrument in his hand and pointed at the two small green dots on the map. "Don't worry, boss, they can't escape no matter what with the super-powered detector I developed." Baron Strucker nodded, but he was still a little worried. "That's good. Send a few more road teams to round them up together. We must ensure that there is no mistake." Yes, the scene returns to the present. Wanda can't remember how many times she and Pietro have escaped. But no matter how they escape, the other party will always block their escape route in advance, just like a prophet, forcing the two to fight and retreat all the way. Until now, Pietro's leg was seriously injured by the trap, and the energy in his body was about to be exhausted. The situation seemed to have fallen into a desperate situation. But even if the chaotic power in his hands flickered, his head was also in pain due to excessive consumption. But facing the many armored vehicles chasing from the front and the densely packed armed personnel surrounding them from all directions, she still resolutely stood in front of Pietro, who had lost his ability to move. Faced with such a desperate situation, Wanda was no longer afraid at this moment, but her heart was full of longing and regret. Longing and regret all came from one person. "Brother Arno, see you in the next life." Wanda's eyes glowed with scarlet light, and the power of chaos in her body surged, ready to give it a try. She could feel that in addition to the energy she could control, there was also a powerful energy in her body that she could not control for the time being. But being unable to control it did not mean that she had no way to use it. She could use the last remaining power in her body to forcibly detonate that powerful energy. The only price was her life. But even if she died, she would drag these people to be buried with her. The scarlet light on Wanda's body became more and more violent. Just when the power of chaos in her body was boiling and about to explode, a warm big hand held her wrist from behind her. "Why bother with the afterlife? You're mine in this life too." The scarlet power of chaos touched Arno, and like a mouse encountering a cat, it quickly retracted into Wanda's body. Obviously it recognized this terrifying existence that easily broke free from its blockade in the illusion last time. Arno Stark, the god in Wanda and Pietro's eyes. It's also the Satan of the Hydra opposite at this moment. Wanda heard the reassuring voice behind her, and she couldn't hold on any longer, having already reached her limit. She closed her eyes and fainted on the broad chest of the person behind her. Arno gently stroked Wanda's sleeping cheek and gently placed her next to the excited Pietro. Slowly turning around, the black cloak on his body moved without wind, and his indifferent black pupils gradually turned red. You bunch of fools, tell me, who gave you the courage to touch my people? Just a gentle word, the air seemed to be quiet. There was only one person on the other side, but the Hydra troops on the opposite side felt their hearts slow down when they saw those red eyes. Shoot, Zizi. A captain-like man just raised his hand to order to fire, but was cut in half by a red laser just after he said a word. Now there was no need to order, all the Hydra people fired directly at Arno. Bang bang bang. The sound of gunfire and artillery fire was deafening in an instant. Arno's tall figure stood in front of Pietro and the other man, and did not dodge or avoid the attacks on his face that were not even a tickle. The red light in his eyes began to boil, and the hot eyes swept across in a fan shape. Zizi. Ah! The red light shot out from the gun smoke was like a sharp sword. Along the way, whether it was fully armed combatants or thick armored vehicles, they were easily cut through like paper in front of this laser, causing countless screams along the way. Baron Stark, who was monitoring in the castle, looked at the man who suddenly appeared on the screen in a daze, and instantly slaughtered the troops he sent. What kind of terrifying power is this? But immediately his eyes became more fanatical and greedy, and he was eager to get this new superpower. Send all the teams to take him down. As long as I get him, I will become the most powerful snakehead of Hydra, the real leader. Baron Strucker, who was always suppressed by Pierce and Lady Viper, was a little crazy. Pierce had his Winter Soldier, and Lady Viper had her superpowers. Only he had no special abilities or special talents, only a group of ordinary Hydra members. He was eager to get his own powerful special power person, so he had been capturing superpowers in the world. But he could not arrest people in all countries as unscrupulously as in Sokovia. In those powerful countries, if he dared to be so arrogant, he would have been surrounded and suppressed long ago. Besides, it is not so easy to catch a powerful superpower, so for so long, he has only caught a few useless superpowers. For example, an idiot who can grow thorns all over his body and thinks he is the best in the world. It was not until Wanda and Quicksilver, two superpowers with great potential, took the initiative to break into his territory that he rekindled his hope. And the arrival of Arno poured a pot of gasoline on his ignited hope, and it burned fiercely. But before the gasoline burned for a while, a pot of cold water was poured on it again. Ah, boss, why don't you think about it again? I feel that this superpower is a little bit wrong, he is a little too strong. Dr. Small Eyes whispered behind him. Baron Strucker, who was in a crazy state, didn't listen at all. He was about to get angry, but a broken tablet hit his face. The energy index of the super energy detector I developed rose rapidly when that person appeared, and finally exploded. Baron Strucker was silenced. He looked at the team that was almost wiped out on the screen, and finally reason overcame impulse. With this force, it was obvious that even if he sent all the remaining people, it would only be a meal for them. Cut off all the signals of the teams sent out, and send the final order for them to launch a suicide attack. Baron Strucker waved his hand and gave the order with some distress. You have to know that it was already half of his team, and now it was gone, his heart was bleeding. But he regained his sanity and knew that he had to cut off the tail in time to survive. With the power shown by the man in the picture, if he was found by him, the power in his hands would not be able to stop him at all. As long as the Green Mountains remain, there will be no worry about lack of firewood. Cut it off when it should be cut off. There will be plenty of opportunities in the future. After receiving the order, the doctor behind him immediately entered the command quickly on the computer. On the other side, all the Hydra teams that had not died out received the final order from the leader. Fight to the death. They immediately knew that they had been abandoned, but there was no fear in their eyes. Everything for Hydra. Long live Hydra. Everyone shouted in a low voice, and their eyes became crazy. The fighters pulled the grenade and rushed towards Arno. The armed helicopter ran out of ammunition and crashed directly into him. The armored vehicle rushed towards Arno while firing machine guns like crazy. Hydra. Arno moved his ears and whispered. If he got the information he wanted, he didn't need to keep these people. After all, these people were obviously brainwashed, more thoroughly than the pyramid schemes. Even if they were captured alive, they wouldn't get any useful information. But they probably never thought that Arno could hear their whispers amid the roar of gunfire. Arno held a suicide-armed helicopter with one hand against him. In the driver's horrified eyes, his fingers sank into the thick armor of the nose. Arno lifted the armed helicopter and smashed it at several suicide soldiers like a giant hammer. Boom. X5. Several suicide soldiers were smashed into meat paste, but the grenades in their hands also exploded. Even the huge helicopter gunship in Arno's hand was blown up to the skeleton of the aircraft. Arno casually threw the skeleton in his hand and smashed a helicopter gunship that crashed into him. His body slowly rose into the air, looking at the ants below indifferently. The farce should end. As Arno turned his head, the red light swept across the sky and the ground. In less than 10 seconds, balls of fire fell from the sky. The ground was covered with broken bodies and armored vehicle fragments. The red light in Arno's eyes gradually extinguished and fell in front of the stunned Pietro. At this moment, Pietro really wanted to wake up his silly sister and let her see the miracles in Arno's godlike figure. These elite troops who chased him and his sister to the point where there was no way to go to heaven or earth were easier to kill than a group of mosquitoes in front of Big Brother Arno. He thought that Arno would be very strong. After all, how could he not be strong if he could go outside the earth? But he didn't expect to be so strong. Come on, let's go home. Looking at Arno's hand reaching out to him, Pietro seemed to have returned to the moment a few years ago when he and his sister held this warm big hand. Pietro smiled and reached out to Arno's big hand. Then, he grabbed nothing. Arno picked up the unconscious Wanda with one hand and let her lean on his arm. Looking at Pietro, whose hand was frozen in the air, Arno showed a barely perceptible dark smile. You are so old and still want to hold hands, aren't you ashamed? Amid Pietro's flushed face, Arno smiled comfortably. I told you to run so far in a bad mood, Wanda. I can't bear to teach you a lesson. If I don't teach you a lesson, I won't be able to eat dinner. A cheerful Arno grabbed Pietro's collar and took off without warning, breaking the speed of sound in an instant. It only takes 0.01 seconds to accelerate to 100 kilometers. Ah! Pietro screamed in the air. S.H.I.E.L.D. Triskelion Building. On the top floor, the office of the former director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the current head of the World Security Council. The originally neat office was now in a mess. Alexander Pierce kicked over his desk in anger, and the computer and documents on the desk were scattered all over the floor. Even if the data in the computer and the scattered documents were released, they would make ordinary people shudder. But he didn't care at all. Now he only had anger and fear in his heart. That idiot Stark. I clearly sent him and Viper a top-secret message not to provoke that person. How dare that fool provoke him? Sitwell, a bald man with glasses, stood aside and trembled and dared not speak. Where had he ever seen the leader who always remained calm and composed in his impression? Such a disgraceful situation. Next to him, Crossbones, Brock Rumlow, who was obviously much calmer, touched his chin and guessed. Could it be that Baron Strucker didn't even read the message you sent? Pierce, who was furious after hearing this, fell silent. Don't say it, it's really possible. Although Hydra has not been destroyed until now, and even lurks in the dark and has developed more powerful than before. But it doesn't mean that they are all iron barrels inside. On the contrary, after the disappearance of the Red Skull, the Hydra in the dark was split into 3 factions. They are Baron Strucker, who develops freely outside. Mrs. Viper, who has mastered many superpowers. Finally, there is his own shield. It is also the most powerful Hydra. Whether in the dark or in the light. The identity of S.H.I.E.L.D. makes it easier for his Hydra to act, so it has developed the most. Although the 3 parties are still an organization in name, making progress together and helping each other, secretly no one is willing to submit to the other. Even so, they are still Hydra. But it is this idiot Strucker who has made Hydra. Not only Strucker's own branch, but even the entire Hydra will be implicated and destroyed. In his special position, he knows Arno's horror better than anyone else. The terrifying power Arno showed more than a decade ago made S.H.I.E.L.D. list him as a top-secret file of level 10 that must not be provoked. This is only Arno's strength 2 years after he woke up. Over the past decade, satellites have occasionally photographed Arno going to the space to bask in the sun. Who knows how strong he can be now? He doesn't have her kryptonite, so how dare he offend this ancestor? Even if he has kryptonite, Arno is not Clark. He didn't grow up on a simple farm, he grew up in an arms family. Pierce's mentality is a little broken, but he is still trying his best to maintain the calmness that a leader should have. Suddenly, Sitwell, with his small bald head and great wisdom, had an idea. "Sir, why don't we report it to A?" Bang! Crossbones, who was beside him, punched him in the stomach and interrupted him from saying the name in time. Crossbones retracted his fist and said in a light tone, "Have you forgotten that we can't mention that name?" Sitwell reacted and saw that Pierce was looking at him coldly. He couldn't help but sweat on his forehead and cast a grateful look at Crossbones. Crossbones smiled and said, "Look, he has to thank us after being beaten by us. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more."